really know what the dating on these are, but based on my analysis, almost assuredly not 200,000 years. Rather, what I have found when I first saw the diagrams is that it looked to me like the site was actually showing the flare star event and the birth of our gas giants. And for a background to the listener, I have been basically researching my extended timeline for EP&C for a while now. Some of it's been influenced by Robert Schoch and Anthony West and Anthony Baval, and I have to say, I actually through doing some other research, I sort of verified the Orion alignment at 11,000 BCE, plus the Younger Dryas, plus the Atlantean story.
I think it's Robert Baval.
Yeah, Robert Baval.
Yeah.
So I'm sticking with my timeline, but the thing is that I could not resolve the way that the solar system had broken down. I couldn't before this site. I couldn't tell you if Jupiter and Saturn were a pair and then the sun came along, or if Saturn and the sun were a pair and then the Jupiter came along, or if Saturn was alone and the sun and Jupiter came along, but somehow the solar system had to break down. So we had this issue where the solar system had to break down. Dave Talbot is talking about the Saturnian configuration.
Well, just before we go any further, the Sun and Jupiter share a common barycenter, plus they have the same oxygen and the same axial tilt.
No doubt about it.
Okay.
However, this is all going to blow that out of the water. Mm-hmm. Now, I would refer everybody, it's not that Dave Talbot is completely wrong, okay? What I would refer people to is to the Discourses of an Alien Sky, number 23, in which he stumbles across the truth, but then he goes right back into talking about the revolving crescent. And he compares the birth of the separation of heaven and earth to the event that we're talking about. And it appears that's actually not quite correct. Certainly it wasn't the polar crescent, but there's also a logical issue. If after the formation, if time only started existing after the rotation of the crescent, then the before time existed, the polar configuration must not have existed. All right, by his own logic, if there was a time before time existed, and then the revolving crescent was the polar configuration, was the way that things were supposed to be, then then that was a new temporary station. And what it's now appearing is that the original sky god, whether you want to call it Uranus or Kronos, Ra, that god or deity was the dwarf star and probably a companion star to the sun. But regardless, it was alone in the sky, and then it underwent a flaring event in which it egged, and it had several different features that are repeated features on cosmic eggs around the world. And that paper will be forthcoming. And I've looked at over, and it's basically almost 200 oval motifs from around the world and measured their diamond ratios. Now, if you remember from the Ramses II paper, if you go to the second page, I analyzed the meaning behind the Ramses II stele. So I've included that entire paper into this Maputo paper. And here we see the translation: the gracious God directed Ramses, Lord of the Upper, Lord of the World, the Sun, Director of Truth, approved by the Sun, the Lord of Diadems, Ramses, beloved of Amun, the giver of life, like the sun forever, Har-Hat, giver of life, stability and power, the gift of incense and libations, Har, of the two solar abodes of life, stability, of power, giver of victory, and magnanimity like the sun continually. So here we have a story. You can see arrow B pointing to your giant man, and then you can see at arrow C, you're pointing to two solar orbs. I measured the ratio of those solar orbs of their equatorial diameters to their polar diameter, and they both identified to Jupiter and Saturn's satellite measurements within 1%. Now, the arrow in A aligned to a ratio that was neither Jupiter nor Saturn. It was 1.23. However, at the time I wrote that paper, I was focused on the Saturnian story and the fact that it called it the Lord of Diadems. Right? Does that make sense? So I was focused on this version of Ra or Kronos, and was accepting that its ratio was 1.23 on account of it said the Lord of Diadems. But the fact is, if you go on to let's see, it would be page 5, you can see Jupiter and Saturn, neither of them have that ratio. So arrow C points out on the stele to the new two solar abodes, which of course are the two brothers, right? So Anu's sons are Enki and Enlil. All right, so what happened to Anu? And also, another good question is what happened to Alelu? Because Anu defeats Alelu. Now, when I did this paper, I hadn't yet analyzed hundreds of cosmic eggs. I was only analyzing the site at Maputo. But skipping ahead, I can tell you that the majority of motifs around the world come down to three things. Number one, a breaking apart of an egg, which sometimes is 1.23, sometimes is 1.5, and sometimes extends all the way out to 1.7, and then it splits apart, and then there are two, and then suddenly there are three. Okay, and this repeats. Actually, if you were to pull up the orthogonal view, are you sharing the screen, by the way, so that people can see?
I'm recording. Yeah, whatever's being recorded is what I'm showing on my screen. Yeah, I'm on page 5.
You have to actually hit share screen for it to show up on your screen.
All right.
There you go. So then go back to the paper.
Okay. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Whoops.
So quickly show people, go back to page 2 so they can see the diagram, and then we'll have you pull.
Yeah, now I'm not understanding. Now, what makes these two particular bodies that are on the stele any more important than any of the other ones?
Because the story is about the two solar abodes, and then when you measure the diameter ratios, they match Saturn and Jupiter respectively, and I use calipers so people can replicate this if they like, within 1% deviation of the satellite measurements of those ratios.
And this is a stele of
Ramses II.
Okay, because Osiris, I think, was their first god, right?
Well, Osiris is a later era renaming.
I see.
The original was Ra.
Okay.
However,
I always wanted to know that.
Ta and Amun, but actually the Amun is probably a variation of the original word for the egg, which was Diaten. All right, and all this is covered in Talbot's Saturn myth. Okay, now the egg you see at arrow A, but its ratio is 1.23, which is nothing like any of the gas bodies in our solar system currently. Okay, so on page 5, like I say, are the actual ratios for Saturn and Jupiter.
Is it possible that could have been Saturn in its brown dwarf stage?
Right. At this stage, Okay, it's not actually Saturn. It's the god that is previous to Saturn. So
That would have been Uranus or Uranus.
Uranus. Well, I'm thinking that the sky god is still, because there are a lot of these egg motifs where there is a strong corona around. So I'm thinking that that it's still Kronos that is the center, but Uranus is actually the entirety of the object. So it's like the Aten, whereas Ra is like the Kronos.
Much
Okay.
like Degrazia's super Uranus.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not familiar with it. I'd have
Well,
to.
I got a video on it if you want to watch it. It's called Solaria Benaria.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that it's possible that the planet Uranus is a Lelu, because when I measure these breakdowns, so first you have the egg,
Yeah.
and it has certain features which I will go over in a little bit. When it breaks down, you end up with two new eggs, one of which who always has a bump coming out of it, and we're going to take a look at that. You'll pull it up on your internet there.
Okay.
And then after that, form three spheres. Now, when I measured that third one, the only hit, as far as ratios go, that comes close is Neptune. And as of course you know, Poseidon and Shiva are considered ancient gods, but not the original, right? So before Shiva is Indra and Brahma, right? And so Shiva comes later. And Poseidon also is not considered original. It does appear that somehow Enki, the two brothers are almost assuredly Jupiter and Saturn, but somehow Enki becomes mixed up here and becomes the Poseidon character. But that a lot of time has passed, so it could have happened very easily. The point is that the ratios only match those three bodies. They don't match the planet Uranus. In any of the 170 some eggs that I analyzed, and some of them do come out to a 1-to-1 ratio. So on those motifs, I can't prove whether those are planetoids, because most of the planetoids ratios are a 1-to-1, almost 1-to-1, or the sun, which has almost a perfect 1-to-1.
Mm-hmm.
However, those circles are very rare, comparatively speaking, to the vast majority of these motifs, which have a smattering of different ratios. Usually, like I say, the 1.23 to 1.26. Then there's a group that's in the 1.4, then in the 1.5, and then up and above 1.7 all the way to 2. So what it appears is that, let's take Gobekli Tepe. In fact, pull up a Google image search for the Gobekli Tepe, like an above view, an exactly above view. See, try and get an image search of as orthogonal as you can get.
Can you see?
The one on the upper left is perfect. All right, so when you see that, where would you say the vulture stone is? And this is the key. They are misunderstanding this site completely. Even the whole triple system theory that just came out, they aren't getting it, because they're still looking at it as circles. The vulture stone, if you go up to the top, the original circle, and you go up, see that one that's sticking out of the bump? Oh, yeah. See the one that's sticking out of the bump?
Here?
No, in the circle, but go up. The top circle. Okay, go up. See that one that's sticking out of the bump?
I think so.
Okay, that is the vulture stone. It's exactly at the bump. You'll also notice the following features. The egg is shaped sort of like a chicken egg. However, it has a flattish bottom. It has a like kind of short round hump. It has a bump, and then on the split sphere down on the lower left, there's also another bump. Okay, now go open up a good sized picture of the vulture. Keep this open. Go open up a good sized picture of the vulture stone.
Okay. Should I put Gobekli Tepe vulture stone?
Yeah, that would work. There you go. Okay, see if you can get a good picture below up there.
They don't get any bigger. I don't know why, but I can't watch it. It just goes to the website.
That's fine. See if you can open it up and then open up the image and then zoom it in.
Let me see. That's what it does right there. How would I do that? I don't know how to make it bigger.
Just try and right click on it and see if it'll open image in new tab.
Open image in new tab. Okay. No.
No, open image in new tab, not open link.
Open image in new tab.
Middle down.
Okay, got it. Okay.
All right, and then it opened in a tab right there.
Which one was it? This one? No. This one? No. This one? Yeah.
Yeah. Now zoom in.
How do I zoom in? It's not.
Control plus. Hold Control, hit plus, and zoom in right in on that egg.
Plus.
Keep going. What do you notice about the so-called vulture? First of all, it has those features. You see, it has a flat butt, and it has kind of a bump sticking out on one side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you counting its beak as the bump?
Okay, the beak is going to turn out to be some kind of discharge phenomena. Okay, but the main point is that you see the back. Now, look at the egg that it's presenting.
Mm-hmm.
It also has a chick popping out of it right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's missed this. Okay, I think I'm probably the only one in the whole world who's noticed this thing. Mm-hmm. Do you see the chick clearly popping out?
I see something. It looks like it has an eye and a little beak. Yeah.
Right. All right, but one is presenting the other. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And the chick is facing the larger body.
Right.
That's another key point. So when the flare happened, and this site is reliably dated 11 to 12,000 years ago, at least at this particular circle. In fact, the vulture stone is supposed to be the oldest one of the oldest ones. When it flared out, there was a split, and then there was discharge. Almost all of the other sites show, like in India and China, show a plasma double layer boundary that forms between them that creates an owl eye effect. All right. Mm-hmm. Now go back to the above view of the Gobekli Tepe. I think you had it open. Yeah. All right. So the first body is at the top. That's the oldest circle. Then when the flare happened, they buried that site. They of course recorded on the steles what was happening in each of the quarters, and it was told in pictographical story because they didn't have written language. And then they buried that site and they dug these two sites. Now these motifs show up repeatedly. Number one, the one on the right is that's a Chinese character, means mouth. And another way of saying mouth is mask. All right, and the mouth character is one of the oldest Chinese plasma scripts. And then the one on the left, actually, if you didn't have the site boards over it and everything like that, you would see that it is that oval with a chick sticking out. All right, and they have schematic drawings of that. Okay, are you following me? So now you have one sphere that elongated itself, and I forget the ratio of that one, but it's not 1.23. It's near to it though. It's a little longer. I think it's the one. I think it's one of the ones that's like 1.4. I could pull open the data, and I measured that via, I used the center of the stones, and then I used the very inside edge of the stones as if they may have made their oval by the inside circle.
Mhm.
And then it splits into those other two bodies.
Okay.
And then a third body appears in the story, and that third body appears to be the birth of either, like I say, either Neptune or Uranus. But the only ratio that ends up working out when you see all three is Neptune. So this is really fascinating information. This
It's
means
interesting.
the
Yeah.
dwarf star gave birth, and what I'm thinking is that it gave birth starting at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. It split, and then it went through the entire Younger Dryas period, and then again there was a flare at the end of the Younger Dryas period, and that's when the polar configuration actually started.
Mhm.
Go back to my paper. All right, so now enter how can we verify Gobekli Tepe in Egypt, because it could be the same culture theoretically. So when we look at Maputo, Mozambique, you can go on down to let's see here. I don't know if I have the scans in actually. Now I'm thinking about it, I haven't put the scans in. Dang. So you're gonna have to pull up Google searches. This is just me talking about how people misunderstand the pyramids and everything. Let's do a Google image search for Maputo, and because people are going to be bored by looking at graphs and data, but I do have the ratios in there, but without the scans, it's not going to mean anything to anybody. There you go, Maputo. Probably you'll have to put the ruins, Maputo ruins, or Maputo circles, or something like that, because it's an active city. Let's see here. Okay, very good. So look at that tone on the top right, and then also you've got the four quadrant one there too. So you have, and the one on the top right, look at what I'm saying. So the center one is the actual god, the egg. You see that it's got the features, right? It's got a flat one side, a short butt, and a bending out where something is trying to poke out. Then you've got the larger coronal discharge, and something is emerging from there. There may be some effect of erosion and plant life altering the site, but more or less you have the sky god surrounding his first son. And remember that the original god, he was his own mother, father, and gave birth to himself, right? Mm-hmm. So the Aten is surrounding Ra, and he is alone in his egg. Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yeah. I'm gonna have to, go over this again to get it completely, okay. But I think I follow you somewhat. Yeah.
It's all contained in the Cardona and Dave Talbot books, but
okay.
Like I say, is that Dave is trying to interpret it all as Saturn, and what I'm saying is that Saturn is the remnant of the event. And he may be saying that, but the way he presents it in his Discourses of an Alien Sky is that we were with Saturn before, and there was no Jupiter and everything. Well, of course, because actually Saturn and Jupiter were birthed together in the same event. And the dwarf star they came from was a literal different god. It was a different era in which there was no time then, because there wasn't even a revolving crescent, is what I'm trying to tell you. Mm-hmm. Now, it may be possible that it was that the revolving crescent appeared when the sun and the dwarf star neared each other, and that created both the flare event and the appearance of the crescent. That's possible. But if we keep to Dave Talbot's research, then Saturn forming a polar configuration with Mars would then be the first time the crescent actually appears. And the configuration that we have is because for some reason when it's split, or maybe Saturn stayed in the center and Jupiter flung off. It's not really clear. But the ratios are clear that one of them is Jupiter and one of them is Saturn. That's what is absolutely clear from ratio measurements from these different sites. So go back and open up the quadrant one.
This one?
Yeah, that one. So this was the one that blew my mind. I mean, you can see very clearly. Yeah, let's see if we can make that bigger. So on the lower, first of all, the lower right, you can see very clearly the story of this triad, this family that's birthed. But on the lower left, you see also that there was a period when they were literally separating from inside the egg. So the outer corona is shown, and then inside the star is actually bursting and pulling apart. And so sequentially, this site in I think this one's Maputo. I'd have to. This might be Baconi. This site is actually showing clearly the different stages of the breakdown. So what you have around the world are different cultures focused on different parts of that breakdown. Some cultures made better recordings at every stage, such as the people at Gobekli Tepe, but they would make it in large form, then they would bury it, and then go to the next stage for the new religion. Whereas say in India or in Aboriginal Australia, they would go to a new part of the wall, and in a place like Utah, they would just scribble all over the very same wall based on where in the sky it was happening. So it looks like random graffiti, but it's actually a recording of where in the sky it's happening. And probably, if we look carefully at newspaper rock, we're probably going to find some key such as a constellation or some other sign that will enable us to figure out exactly what quarter it was in and what era it happened. But the problem is the erosion and the destruction of these sites makes it a little difficult.
So what
However,
you're saying basically is that they were recording the breakdown of what happened.
That's correct. They were recording exactly what Dave is talking about in episode 23 of Discourses, but
I'll have to watch that
in detail. And it wasn't just about the formation of a crescent boat. It was about the entire formation of the birth of the gas giants, because from Kronos comes 3 brothers and 1 sister, and that's our 4 gas giants. Now the question is, where does Uranus come from? And then also, is that chick birthing out of the smaller of the 2 eggs? Is that Venus popping its head out, or is that Neptune? That's not what's clear. We can't tell, because in one moment you see the 2 spheres with the chick popping out, and then the next you see 3 spheres, one of which happens to have a pretty good correlation to the diameter ratios of Neptune. But with the erosion factor at this site, and there just not being enough data, we can't prove conclusively that it was Neptune. We can say it probably wasn't Venus unless Venus was stretched out, which is possible too. There's also the possibility of refraction in the atmosphere. It may have looked different when it first emerged. There's a lot of unanswered pieces of data here. I also think that the Venus event correlates pretty well to later on, that event is closer, because the Mayans only record 5 suns, whereas the older between 3 and 5,000 years ago, which would correlate well to the Velikovsky Exodus story. So if Venus is birthed 3 to 5,000 years ago, or possibly at the 7,000 year ago boundary, there's a good reason why we could pick the 7,000 year ago boundary. I don't think it's the 7,000 years, but the good reason would be all of the destructions around the world that appear at 7,000 years and the formation of the Sahara Desert. But the reason why we wouldn't choose it is that we still need room for Zeus, that is Jupiter, to overthrow Kronos. Now, after a time, Saturn did become, apparently, because it was central to our galaxy, it became known as the Kronos, even though the Kronos was this egg. And we could call that Uranus, so we could keep them separate. But Uranus appears to actually be the corona around the egg. But let's say that let's call the original egg Uranus, and then Kronos becomes just Saturn, in which case there needs to be a time when Jupiter and Saturn wrestle for supremacy in the sky. That seems to correlate best to the 7,000 year ago boundary when the Sahara is created, and a number of other important things around the world happen, such as the changes in Doggerland and the climate there in the Orkney Islands, and the final disappearance of the megafauna, because they start disappearing in the Younger Dryas, but they really didn't completely go away till about 7,000 years ago. And so I think that very likely the wrestling is a gravitic discussion with some thunderbolts, of course. And then as the system is already, the god has toppled out of the sky, he's fallen from the pillar, Zeus is ascendant to the mountain, Olympus, then there's some kind of other flare event, maybe some magnetosphere rubbing, or it could be lattice exclusion. Somehow Venus gets ejected, and then of course time passes. There's a flood. There's all sorts of destructive events, and of course it's quite possible that that Venus passes through Jupiter and appears that Athena appears to be birthed from Zeus's forehead. But now you're into the 3,500 years ago boundary and headed towards the Greek Dark Ages. So by extending our timeline and accepting the Atlantean period of 12,500 plus years ago being ended at the Younger Dryas, we can describe the breakdown of the original God star over a 10,000 year period and the interaction of these spheres. And I think that we've been struggling with each other, different parts of the community, some favoring Jupiter, some favoring Saturn, some saying it's all nonsense, the sun was always our sun, which there's no evidence to support that at this point.
Right.
Then what solves it is looking at these sites as chronological stepping recordings of key events. And if you think about it, what do people make photographs for anyways? Usually to commemorate some kind of event. Mm-hmm. Only now, when we have digital cameras, do we just take hundreds and hundreds of photos and it doesn't matter. But most of the time, if you see a polar configuration or an eclipse or a comet, it's probably because it's a special event, not because it's a common event. And so being a special event, there must have presaged or accompanied some major change in the celestial order. And then these sites, they record them in a lot of different fashion. Here you have stone and earthwork. In other places, they use rock art. In other places, they use paint. In some places, they use hieroglyphics, like the Egyptians were obviously a very advanced and high IQ society to put everything in stone with writing, so that we could know that there were two solar abodes and one was called the Lord of Diadems. So this event appears to be some sort of forced separation, and I can't, of course, prove that it was the sun didn't pull them apart by the entire solar system entering its heliopause, or if it was an internally generated event, some form of, again, lattice exclusion, an electrical event. The whole thing does have the appearance of cellular mitosis. It has this plasma lifelike expression, and of course the birthing from the egg did not miss the ancients. They immediately recognized it like an egg and like the birthing of a bird.
Mhm.
And undoubtedly, Horus the hawk is goes all the way back to the original birthing of Jupiter from this whole catastrophe. So that's what the research that I've been doing and looking at these ratios, and they keep showing up everywhere, and it's just absolutely fascinating to find. In fact, here in Lexington, there was an earthwork. Its ratio was 1.78, and it has some interesting features that are different than other sites. So it's not exactly clear why they focused on that period. It must have been the moment just before the ejection got started, because there's an interesting, almost like a chunk missing out of the egg. And then, of course, it's very elongated, but not in a bean-like shape, because the long bean is a different, I think, a different motif. Not exactly sure what it is. It might have been based on one site, and I think it was New Zealand. It appears that was possibly actually a corona that surrounded a synchrotron formation or some kind of ladder of heaven shape that was associated with the creation. In fact, a lot of times these two eggs, when they separate, there are huge amounts of shapes and plasma discharges that are connected to them in some kind of electrical circuit formation. And it's almost like there was a sudden birth of a plasma heaven. And I find that incredibly fascinating as well. It must have been really mind-blowing. Probably the people thought that the gods were not only fighting, but also talking to them through these symbols up in the sky.
You know, that I've been meandering around the internet researching the Pelestians, who were the pre-Greek civilization. And in my travels of learning about that, I've come across the Hyperboreans, the Atlanteans, who happen to be giants. Where do you think the names for Saturn and Jupiter came from? Because Pelestians or Atlanteans, a couple of the articles that I've read or essays, they're stating that Uranus was the first king who was replaced by Saturn, who was replaced by Zeus or Jupiter. So that may be where they got the names from, that there were actually kings that existed in the prehistory, before.
King?
Yeah.
I mean, that's always possible.
I often wonder, where did they get the name Saturn from?
It's quite possible that at the birth of kingship in the Atlantean period, because I doubt that the Sumerians came up with it. Of course, the Sumerian records make it clear that there is a teaching from the Anunnaki. Right. They teach them the rights of kingship. However, there is an Egyptian kings list that goes back over 24,000 years.
Right.
And so the Egyptians seem to believe that the Atlantean period, that they were the ones who were the original, the OGs of civilization.
Yes.
And as such, it's quite possible that when they determined what kingship was, that the name of whoever was in charge, that he became the living avatar of the god above, and that the god was given the same name as he. Yes. And then that was then recorded down and handed down or sung around a fire or whatever and export a ship. And then later, younger cultures such as the Greeks had already learned that the proper name, whatever culture was in the Greek, because the oldest modern humans now, the remains are coming from the north side of the Mediterranean. So we know that they were already there. But those original Greeks, I mean, they're assuredly gone and replaced by these civilized Greeks. So where did the civilized Greeks get their culture? They borrowed it from the Babylonians, and the Babylonians borrowed it from the Akkadians and Sumerians, who borrowed it from who knows who, right? Tepe people, maybe the original Egyptians. However, they almost assuredly transferred the quote proper name. We know that this is a thing because the Hebrews obsessed about the secret name and the proper name. In fact, most people, I would say, if you did a quiz out of a million Christians in America or anywhere, and you put all the possible answers on there, very few, if any, would say Yao. Mm-hmm. And yet we know from multiple cultures that the Yao, which is the symbol of both the thunderbolt and of the triple rays of the three gods pointing down, is the creator, preserver, destroyer, is the original name of the god. It's the secret name, in which then El is the I guess more commonplace name, and Jehovah or Yahweh becomes the of course the tetragrammaton is the name that is used publicly, but the Yao is the secret name, and that is reported also among the Welsh, who with their Colburn writing, they came originally from Troy, and they may very well have been one of the lost tribes of the Hebrews. Mm-hmm. And there is also a possibility that they came from what is now Crimea, the Samaria. Of course, at the time that they would have come from there, it would have been a much bigger land than it is now, because that whole sea filled in after the melting of the ice caps. So the movement of the people makes it impossible to trace the original name. But it should be clear that the Aten was not the god. The Aten was the egg surrounding the god. He was in his own egg, right? He was in his egg. And then we have the evidence that basically he birthed himself, which means that Saturn was actually just the core of the original god coming out. Let's see if I include, I'm not sure if I included another translation here. I don't think I did. So I would have to refer people to the Dave Talbot text. Get the Eduardo Cardona books. They're a bit expensive, but I think they're really worthwhile to have. Where there are lengthy translations and references to the god giving birth to himself. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean? This 1.23 ratio splits. It lengthens and then splits and forms Jupiter and Saturn, of which Saturn becomes the polar configuration that we can prove was a polar configuration, but it was a temporary period in which there was wavering of the bodies. They were only held in that place not because of special math. They were held in place because of an electrical behavior that is no different than the behavior of Pluto and Charon and Earth and the moon, right? The moon still faces, the same side always faces us, because there's an electrical attraction between the two. And so this polar configuration was a temporary station, but it was long enough to form the roots of the religion in which these original Egyptians hearken back to the first civilizers, and then the Egyptians then create complex hieroglyphic systems in order to remember the past and promulgate the correct order of how to behave and what was happening in the sky, what it all means. They go away because of the deluge, because of the event where Jupiter overthrows Saturn. Of course, it's not really overthrowing Saturn. All that's happening is that Earth is being moved from Saturn's orbit and going into Jupiter's orbit. And we now have proof of that because of, as we went over, the Jovian octagons showing that the northern hemisphere of the Earth passed over. It was, first of all, it was up, well, the Earth was upside down and passed over the northern hemisphere of Jupiter. The octagons are unambiguous. And this was not a long lasting reign either. Only appears to be, whereas the other one may have been like 3,000 to 4,000 years. This one only 1,500 to 2,000 years, at which it ends prematurely. During which, of course, there is a huge flood. Maybe as we approached Saturn, there was, or I mean Jupiter, there was some kind of tidal creation. Maybe we passed through Saturnian water. I can't prove either way. I know that there's some isotopic evidence, but the entire sky changing the entire time, and the creation of heaven and earth is happening now in the Jovian era, and not it's hearkening back to the ancient times, but the actual motifs around the world of the circle and the square, where heaven is round and earth is square, that motif is appearing in the Jovian era. And then there is a birth of Venus, the motion of Athena, the war of Athena, Mars falling out. Mars moves around the sky as a hero, conquering these monsters, which are what? Plasma shapes in the sky, which are Mars is passing through as it orbits around Jupiter temporarily. And then it gets into a relationship with Venus. The two become electrically locked, and they exchange charge with each other for a couple hundred years, maybe as short as even 70 years, but probably a couple hundred years. And then Jupiter strikes Venus with the thunderbolt. Venus flies off towards the sun. Jupiter, the moon, and Mars travel together, and we see this in rock art in Kentucky. Travel together to towards where they're going to be, and they split apart. Of course, Mercury at some point also is sent by Zeus, Hermes, that is, via thunderbolt, and then goes towards the sun. Now, as we approach the sun, Apollo appears to grow like a baby, and for whatever reason, the Earth ends up at the correct distance to where the moon looks the same shape, and the birth of the story of the twins now comes into play, of the male and female twins. This is not the original twins of the two brothers. It's a repeating of the motif, but altered now to male and female, yin and yang, yin and yo, to represent the duality or polarity that they knew about in the energy. In all the electrical stuff that they had inherited, the worship of that. They lost the power to do it, right? The Great Pyramid no longer worked. However, they inherited that mystical understanding, and it was now epitomized by the sun and moon. But if you actually look at the character for yang in Chinese, it contains the character for the sun. If you look at that character, it's two squares, but when you go back in time, it's a hexagon. And that hexagon is a direct reference to Saturn. We know this pretty well. Mm-hmm. And there is good evidence here in Kentucky. There's a piece of rock art that shows the polar configuration here in Kentucky with the hexagon, and it's in bas-relief form. So they actually take the time to scrape out the rock and leave a hemisphere in the center of that hexagon. And then, of course, you all know the rest. Mars, Venus is off. Of course, the Exodus cataclysms have already happened. Mars comes too close, and there's, then the story of Hercules ends, and the sky becomes boring, and mankind goes through a Dionysian period, and we have to invent these bureaucratic religions in order to control the masses. At least that's the way that it went. I don't know if if it was a good thing, but it was certainly the way things went. And the Messiah prophecy that was in existence for 4,600 years becomes a human prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to get into theology, but that appears to be the actual breakdown method at this point, from what we can tell, based on these diameter and equatorial and polar diameter ratios, and these multiple sites now.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. I mean, it comes together pretty good, actually.
It really does. And again, if it weren't for Michael Tellinger, although it doesn't have anything to do with aliens,
Tellinger was saying that these were.
He was saying Anunnaki slave sites, but the thing is,
gold mining. Yeah.
If you were to say that these were made by aliens, I mean, look at them. They don't exactly look like well-engineered sites. Rather, the features that you keep seeing. And look at that one on the upper right. You see how it's got that hexagonal shape, and then you've got the two spheres near to each other.
Mm-hmm.
It might be that that's a description of some event of Venus and Mars overlapping in the hexagon, but it also might equally be the remainder of the coronal discharge surrounding the Jupiter and Saturn breakdown. You notice that one of them, if you zoom in closely to that one in the upper right,
right here.
Well, yeah, zoom into that.
All right, I will. Hold on here.
Right. So look, there is a chick coming out of the circle on the left. So hover your mouse over the inner two. Right. If you go left of that, look at that. There's one emerging. No, not there, but the inner. Yeah, right there. Mm-hmm. And then what's in the background? What appear to be possibly two gas giants. The background. So that, when you compare the ratios of that, of course, I'd have to look at the data to confirm, but I wouldn't be surprised if the one on the left was Saturn, the one on the right is Jupiter, and in the background you have two gas giants, or at least two moons or something like that. We can't forget the moons. Everybody's been leaving out the moons. It really bothers me because you have really large moon bodies, demigods, right? Or fairies, as the Asir and Vanir stories go, right? There are different kinds of elves and fairies. And they're actually a really important part of the story because their effects will have had a lot of subtle implications. They may have been conductors of the plasma shapes. So instead of being actually constellations that we're seeing in these rock art drawings, they might have actually been electric circuits bouncing between different moon bodies as they went around. People have got to remember that there are not just a small amount of satellite bodies around Saturn and Jupiter, but there are many dozens around each. And those would have been split up between the two when the god, had given birth to so many of these little planetoids, and then they would have split them up between each other.
Now, what about this? Is this just a path, or is that some kind of an umbilical cord?
Not sure. It's not clear to me. I think we'd have to go there and actually survey the site. Right. There could be some form of, again, thunderbolt. Maybe as the sun approached, it sent out some kind of tendril that started the entire process.
Yeah,
because the dwarf star would have been much weaker than the sun, even still. If you add all the mass of all four gas giants, you still end up with a star whose mass, and sure, throw in all the heavy bodies and everything, the mass is still below the size of almost every dwarf star. That I think it's below even the smallest dwarf star that we've found.
So this kind of looks like planets or something right around some big body, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
this could be like why the ancients were obsessed with penises.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You
certainly
know.
there's no way to escape the references to motherhood, and of course to with the ejections to sex and power. Power is directed through an implement, right? It's always directed through some implement like a gun, a knife, a bow staff, a bow and arrow, a sword,
Hmm.
and of course
Yes.
a penis is
Right.
another form of power. That is in record in Chinese tradition, and it's just common sense. I mean, it's a well known a fact of life. Uh,
Now, what
so
about these? It looks like
yeah,
something's given birth there.
probably just variations of the same story
Okay.
at different times. I haven't analyzed every single site. There are probably going to be on the orders of thousands of these. So if we had people work together in some kind of project, we could actually compile the ratios for all of these. There's a method that I use for determining where to choose to find the ovals, uh, equatorial and polar diameter. First of all, we always use the equatorial diameter as the longer of the two,
Hmm.
and then because that's just how these gas bodies when they rotate. Because of the rotation, the polar diameter is never longer than the equatorial diameter.
Hmm.
So we will find some number from 1 to above, right? And the longest being that I've seen is its ratio was 2. So really, it's all between 1 and 2, and then you find which category that they compare to, and then you do standard deviations off of that, and all that data is going to be coming up in my in the longer paper whenever it gets released. This paper
Hmm.
is being edited right now and is going to be released pretty soon. It looks like my assistant's been uh, hammering away at the bibliography to hold a whole lot of water. The translation is just above that. Um, I don't pretend to understand the Egyptian hieroglyphics and the religion. In fact, I think that puts me in a better position because I don't think they understand it either. And so
Hmm.
at least I know that I don't know. What we
Hmm.
can do is we can recognize certain motifs and then study them and see if there's some kind of overlap. Some parts of these translations, I assume, are correct on account of the Rosetta Stone, the influence of the Rosetta Stone. However, I am almost certain that we don't understand what the Egyptian culture was doing there. From the Great Pit of El Ariat, that they've said that that's a failed pyramid, and I say that it was a manufacturing center for the chemical substrate used in the pyramid power plant. And there's evidence for that, right? I have a series of evidence for that. So if they can misunderstand the culture that severely when you have physical data, what happens when you're using symbolic data? I mean, they could be completely misconstruing the meaning. They've certainly latched on this idea of a death cult. I don't think it was necessarily a death cult so much as certainly not in the same way I think that you would say the Aztecs had, um, which I have a comment on in a second. But I would say that it was more of a death remembering, and the remembering of whose death, particularly the Amun Ra. And why was that important? The ending of the original king, and then the failure of his self-birthed son, and replacement by, first of all, in one story, a brother, and another, in younger traditions, a child who is then also replaced by a heroic son, a redeemer. I mean, this theme is so powerful that it shows up in Star Wars. So Star Wars isn't only powerful because we blow up the Death Star, which is Venus. It's also powerful because the theme of the fallen father is, and then the redeeming of the lesser son. Notice that Luke Skywalker is smaller and weaker in stature than Darth Vader. That's an
Hmm.
incredibly important point because uh, Mars was physically smaller and weaker in stature. It's a David and Goliath kind of story. Hercules is strong, but compared to Atlas, right? There's an entire myth where Hercules holds the sky up, and Atlas gets a break from holding the sky up, and then Hercules has to trick him to taking it back. Hercules is a small being, smaller than Prometheus even, while the original sky god, whether it's Zeus or you go further back, is always indomitable and incredibly powerful and strong, and that towering figure, but also associated with death, associated with plague, associated with darkness, with a scythe that cuts things, cuts the nuts off of his own father, and cuts down life. There's even a story of Odin, where he goes to the land of the giants, and he sees them farming, and he decides to trick them, and he has them, he pretends to that the scythes are too dull, and he sharpens them, and he gets them going, and then he has them raise them up, and in one fell swoop they all cut each other's heads off. And the only explanation given is that he was constantly looking for warriors for his battle at Ragnarok. So he had to kill these giants so he could have them later on. They would be off in hell or in Valhall, actually, and from Valhall they would be able to be called upon later for the battle of Ragnarok. So this is a very dark perception of their lord, Odin. And so Thor was much more favored. Of course, the common theme is the TH or T rune. And by the way, the T rune in Kolbrin is the same shape as the Yao symbol. It's the Alwyn glyph. Now, the Aztecs, as far as the Aztec death cult goes, I think that was actually the same kind of perversion you see in Egypt of the religion over time, with the incest and the mummification going to insane lengths and the enslavement of people. But with the Aztecs, they not only had that perversion of the ancient religion, but they were set off by the spreading of the Chinese pox. When the Chinese arrived in the 1430s, the American continent, it was, we think, a form of cowpox. And their solution, their government program, was to institute slavery of their neighbors and ripping out of hearts to honor Quetzalcoatl. And then, of course, the Spanish show up, get the help of the neighbors, overthrow them, and then, in a weird fit of irony, bring along the smallpox and wipe them out further. So government programs just weren't working even back then. So various types of government programs failing on all fronts to protect people.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. Very good. Yeah. I'm wondering how it's gonna, how people are gonna receive it. You know, it's going against just about everybody.
I know that, but data is more important than dogma.
I'm interested in the truth, you know.
The facts are that we don't have enough space in the current standard model, and yet they keep finding older dates. So their own model,
they're going to keep doing that too.
They've broken themselves. So checkmate number one on that side. As far as the alt stream goes, there's nothing showing that we need aliens to talk about this stuff. To get into biology, that's a whole different discussion. But as far as cosmology, we don't need aliens to talk about Maputo and Baconi. Or even the Bosnian pyramids, for that matter. All we need is to understand the Saturnian motifs. But in understanding the Saturnian motifs, we cannot just ignore huge bodies such as Uranus, such as the Jovian moons. We can't say that there is a collinear alignment in one instance that's mathematically based, and then talk about wandering spheres going back and forth this way. That kind of instability, first of all, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me in terms of angular momentum. Secondly, it's that kind of that kind of wavering should totally change the system, would break it down. It's much easier to explain if you explain it by important events. What means something to different people at different times, and why, and then what did it inspire, and who did it inspire, and how did they move about? Why did they have to change? You have a beginning of a younger Dryas and an end of a younger Dryas. So this comet business is malarkey. I can show it's malarkey. Of course, there were impacts. We know that. We agree that there are impacts. But talking about a comet is a one-time event. So you have to pick. You can't pick the comet to be at the beginning of the younger Dryas and at the end of the younger Dryas. And that seems it's almost like the Hancock and company crew. They want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
But you can't do it both ways. All right. And a comet cannot melt. I've already talked about this in discussion. I'm not sure if it was your show, but you can't get a comet to melt the ice caps with that kind of energy without destroying the world, without destroying all life on Earth. And you're certainly not going to get selective extinction. So you need a better mechanism. And the thunderbolts are the clear expression of that. Now, there were, of course, things that struck the surface, but the Carolina Bays do not show a single event. They show a repeated event in which something passed near to Earth, and there was an attraction or some reason why that area, there's some charge that it happened more than once. I was watching a Pecos Hank video, and he was filming this one tree, and it got struck several times in a row. That's a clear sign that there is a charge accumulation happening there, and it was the circuit had not balanced, and so it had to keep striking in that same place. It's quite possible that whatever the internal structure of the Earth is generates that kind of charge that could pool up at the Carolina Bays and have a repeated behavior of having a strike there. But those bays don't show that they are from the same age, and they don't show the same vector line. It also could just be different events, but coming from different vectors. But it wasn't ice chunks. That much I know, and anybody who has spent any time shooting the ground with bullets can tell you the same thing. Mm-hmm. So we have to come up with better. We just can't keep ignoring data in order to promulgate the best theory, you know. And I understand people base their entire lives around this kind of stuff. That they have spent a lot of time on these theories, and that they've spent a lot of effort. And the research is useful regardless. I mean, you can take the translations. Cardona does a great job of this. He uses the translations, and then he challenges the assumptions and conclusions of authors when those authors make illogical conclusions based on the data that's looking them right in the face. You can't read the translation of the Ramsey Soleil and come to the conclusion that it's talking about one sun. It's talking about two solar abodes. So if you're talking about two solar abodes, what are those solar abodes? And why are we calling them solar abodes in the first place? They were behaving as shiny bodies, and they were closer than they are now, period. And besides, the Hopewell octagons at 3 different sites prove that conclusively. There is no way to explain that site. Even if they were to observe them from far off, are people going to seriously argue that they had powerful telescopes in the Hopewell in the Ohio River Valley, but they somehow didn't, leave behind any hieroglyphics or anything else? That doesn't make any sense. So those Jovian octagons that are in the Ohio River Valley, they belie a close observation and the use of trigonometry, but a close observation of Jupiter's North Pole. So if there was a period where we were orbiting Jupiter, then unfortunately Dave Talbot can't be correct on that end either. It can't only be about Saturn, period. And much as I love his work, it's just period. It cannot only be about Saturn. And the twin motif cannot only be about Saturn and its 2 arms. It has to be about Saturn and Jupiter, and then later on about the sun and the moon. And all of these things belie the cycle of changes. I got bad news for people there too. These cycles don't appear to be at any kind of regular interval. So there's no predictability for the next change. I can tell you one thing. Since we've been to Jupiter and looked at the South Pole and with infrared satellite, it has gone from being a pentagram of huge vortices the size of America to a hexagon again, which might indicate a reconnection of the Birkeland currents from the South Pole of Jupiter to the South Pole of Saturn. And seeing as how this is correlating exactly with climate change happening on all of the atmospheric bodies in the solar system and the decline of the sun to having no sunspots per se, it does seem like there might be cause for rearrangement. I have no idea if that means the Earth will flip over. And I have no idea if it means that our magnetosphere will suddenly disappear. No one can make those predictions. Earth's the Ben Davidson. No one can make those predictions. What we can do is look at the past data and we can surmise. But there's no egg shape in our sun, so it doesn't look like it's about to give birth to any kind of planets.
I think stars and galaxies are just like people. They have their young when they're young, and then they settle down and live their life.
We don't have, unless NASA's hiding it, any proof that a planet X is approaching. Nothing appears to be wobbling out of orbit. So something is happening, something energetic, something interesting, but there's no proof that it is following a Randall Carlson sacred geometry thing. I think that rather those cultures in the past, they calculated those complex numbers and equations, realized that there was some golden ratio like implications, and we're trying to use that as a predictive for the future. And as we see with the Mayans, didn't work out, right? 2012, there wasn't anything that specifically happened.
Right.
So if they're only off by, 10 to 20 years and something does happen, that's pretty impressive still. But I'm just saying I don't see that kind of precision. What the precision I do see is in the ratio measurements, because the bodies were close enough to see so they could stick their instruments up and their sticks and actually, it's almost like you can put your fingers around an object and you can say, okay, here's how wide it is. They could do that with sticks and make a little measuring device and replicate that right onto the stele, right onto earthwork, right onto the rock art. And they did it around the world, including the so-called illiterate Native Americans of the Ohio River Valley and of the desert south.
Yeah, I'm going to put a couple of links in Skype for you that I want you to watch a couple of programs. I recently read from a book that was written in 1957, and it's The Moon in History. And basically in the book, the author, whose name slips my mind right now, he was a French scholar. He read from the ancient records that the moon was very close to the Earth, and possibly we had two moons and one of them crashed, and that the whole lifting event with Tiahuanaco and all that, like you talked about, is comes from that. So you should listen. You should listen to that presentation because because it has a lot to do with what you said last time about the moon having an uplifting effect on places in the Earth.
Yeah, I mean, the moon is convenient because it shows the electrical scarring effects, and it has an electrical connection with the still, and it's close. Of course, we have other connections. We're still connected to Venus. We're still connected to Mars. But we have the most direct evidence from the moon, and it's easiest to focus on the moon. Plus, there are native stories saying the moon, that she caused the great flooding. Of course, the moon also being this watcher could have been some informant or an evil eye that was the extension of Zeus. Because Zeus, remember, people didn't, this wasn't really a religion. It was just kind of fact of life. It's sort of like if you lived under Stalin, you don't look up to Stalin. Hey, he's got eyes everywhere.
Right.
And every occasionally he might come down and smite you. Well, that's sort of the Zeus character.
So this picture that we're seeing here with these rockworks, this is what was viewed from the Earth. This is how they saw it.
It does appear so. I would say, of course, these are large.
Yeah.
I can't prove that
Now this is like
the
two
physical
bodies.
size. I can't prove that the physical size of these is how big it looked in the sky, but I
Right.
would say it was probably that big and impressive. Probably, because
This,
why else would they make the effort? When
right.
you live a subsistence lifestyle, why would you make any effort to make it that large? And in the case of Great Serpent Mound, we know that's a Venus motif. Probably the size of the egg at the front of the Venus motif is probably a good indicator of how big Venus was in the sky as it went by.
Now these two right here almost look like two huge bodies that are merged, or one's coming out of this one, and then you got three bodies here. Am I reading that right?
Well, I think it's actually the discharges,
This almost looks like an eggshell.
plasma. I think it's plasma layers around those bodies
Okay, okay.
as they're close in behavior. Because when they would split apart, they wouldn't just fly apart; they would come apart, and there would be some kind of plasma atmosphere. But remember, first came the two, then birthed the third, is what these sites are telling us. And it's more than one site. It's not just South Africa. This is also seen in India and in Australia or Tasmania, one of those locations down there. There's a really impressive rock alcove that has all these different motifs on it, and they're very exquisitely carved sites. And then, of course, the Chinese stuff. And this matches the religion, because we have a culture, and of course, the numerologist kind of people, they want to focus on the symbolism of the numbers, whether they're Fibonacci's or primes or anything like that. I would say rather that these events taught us the importance of those things, that it wasn't probably that important beforehand, because knowing the Fibonacci doesn't help you catch a deer or plant a tree. And back then they didn't farm by corn, they farmed trees, and the trees grew fruit and nuts. So you wouldn't need complex math for all that. So what did they come up with it from? Where did they get the ideas from? Almost assuredly they learned it from watching this birth process. And what do the Chinese say? The zero begat the one begat the two begat the three, and the three begat the 10,000 myriad things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the Chinese saying goes. And so, this event probably mystified them. To this day, the Holy Trinity is still a thing, but so is the pair, right? The two, the twinning. And of course, the singularity. We are obsessed with the concept of being fallen from our original place. That can be shown to be almost certainly instigated by this event, and it weighed heavily on us. In many cases, especially with the flood, we actually blame humanity, which is probably an unreasonable conclusion. Mm-hmm. I mean, considering the power levels, even to this day, we can't generate that kind of power.
No.
So it's really ridiculous, but it is with us, and we can't seem to shake it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously elites and people who really believe heavily in the anthropomorphic versions of this stuff and actually act upon it. And it's, of course, completely possible that they have secret societies as well. We know the elites believe in this stuff. We don't know if they all attend secret societies. But the irony is that the way that they're viewing certain deities like Baal or Moloch, etc., they're all ultimately just utilizing their own psychology, when the original motifs of Baal and Moloch and stuff all had to do with something completely different. I'm not saying that there's no validity to people being afraid of demonic possessions and things like that. I'm only saying any elites acting on that, it's clear that they don't understand where this stuff is coming from. No one does. No one's understanding it. Velikovsky was the only one who was seeing straight. Yeah. And we owe him that gratitude, because he was seeing straight, and he had probably been paying attention to some of the stuff that Freud and them were saying and thinking, well, this doesn't seem completely right. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like when you listen to Joseph Campbell, he's right, but you can tell he's not right. You know, it's just not correct. It's mostly correct, and it's got that the beauty of the Jungian archetypes, but the Jungian archetypes don't have any explanation. Well, Dave Talbot gives them explanation, gives them context, and that context is so important because then you can decide which archetypes are bullshit. You know, like the way that we view women, whether or not women do have that dual side to themselves, it's kind of bullshit that we promote that in our culture consistently. And I think that it's almost certainly that if women show that dual side, that they're only imitating the culture's expectation of them. Of course, other people are going to say it's biology, whatever. Men are from Mars and women from Venus, blah blah blah. But the effect is irrefutable. I mean, all the cultures. It's just all over the world. The way that women have been treated on account of the effects of the Venus event.
Yeah.
And it's brutal if you stop and think about it, that from generation to generation what that teaches. And who doesn't love a good Thor or Hercules story? But let's get real. We're talking about a god of war. We're talking about a god of death. We're talking about cultures that live by pillage economy.
Yep.
And how many people still idolize feudalism and pillage economy, whether or not they mean to. I understand it's a hard thing to see male testosterone getting weaker and people acting weak and not strong, male or female. However, we should be clear that, you know, it's not like Mars was a good guy.
Yeah.
You know, and neither was Athena. We have this Wonder Woman kind of mentality about Diana, right? I mean, literally that and her defeating Ares, and that is not the case. The records clearly show that the Venus event nearly wiped out mankind. I mean, plague of death kind of stuff. You know, it was terrible. Terrible events. Well, we shouldn't ascribe that to women also. I mean, some women can be bad and some women can be great. That's the vagary of human psychology. But we have foisted this stuff onto our psychology and then created very complex religions, some of which are closer to some kind of science and some of which are just completely bunk. Regardless, once we have those religions, they don't go away quickly. We pass on the information, and now we're busy recreating the myths and passing on certain variations for commercial reasons. Obviously, it's big money. Into the world media is big money, and it's not necessarily helping us solve problems. It's not solving deforestation, and it's not solving feeding the world, and it's not solving how to get electricity from space. In fact, if anything, I think that there's possibly an argument to be made that because people refuse to look at these motifs straightly, continuously propagate superstition that keeps us from grasping the electric force correctly.
Yeah, well, Tesla,
he
was the one who was saying that there was another kind of electricity called impulse electricity. And it wasn't electromagnetism. It was a different kind of electricity.
Well, I wouldn't doubt it. There is, you know, a lot of cultural systems believe in a spiritual electrical force. And that connection is, it's somewhat like electricity, but it is definitely different. For example, chi or ruach is conductive through cloth, especially organic cloths, right? And it's also in the Chinese tradition and in clinical practice. I can tell you that it's accurate. There are certain types of cloths you can wear which are insulative to chi, and some are purely conductive, and they will rob you of your energy. So where, you know, that isn't obeying electrical understanding as we know it. And it might be that we don't understand charge completely. That could be the issue. But just haven't really spent time connecting to it because it's sort of become a weird taboo. And the only people that seem to have the carte blanche to dive into it is the U.S. and Chinese governments. Maybe the European Space Agency as well. And certain labs are getting funding to do it, and then everybody else, it's like, well, go and worship this dark matter and space time and all this other stuff that's completely bunk.
Right.
And then as far as like the Roman Church, I don't know what the Roman Church knows about electricity in their vaults, but certainly they've spent a long time keeping and promulgating very ancient myths from around the world. They've collected myths from other cultures and utilized those for their own power and control, but they haven't. I don't know that they've necessarily connected the original force of the Elohim to the electric force. I don't know that that's true. Certainly, Velikovsky, he said that there was a rabbinic text that said there was a thunderbolt nearby, lapse of the Red Sea. So I wish I had a copy of that rabbinic text. I wish that he would have put a perfect citation in to Worlds in Collision to say where that rabbinic text comes from, because if the inner circles of the Jewish community know of more rabbinic that have evidence of the thunderbolts of the gods and the electrical events and all of what was happening, it would take a lot of the mysticism out of what's happening. Of course, the ancient architect alien people will say that higher Exodus and the escape of the Hebrews can be boiled down to lords and feudalism and alien upper elite. That showed up in that 1000 BC movie. I watched it recently, and
yeah, I got to see that again.
Yeah, well, the main villain is like this god who's extra tall, and you never see his face and all this stuff. But
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe that's true. But what if the golden calf is nothing more than Venus, and Sinai, it was still glowing because it had been struck by a thunderbolt, and the burning bush is burning because it's got plasma glowing off of it? It's hard to know because the word kavod, we don't know what it translates to. Glory is rather ambiguous. And, you got people who say it's a spaceship's glow, and you got people who say it's some kind of nuclear fire, and some say it's, miracle glow light. The problem I have with the miracle glow light stuff is where is it now? Did after the apostles leave, suddenly heaven stops interacting with mankind? Doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that we don't understand how people back then thought of things and how they may have used. It sort of reminds me of that hieroglyphic where it's a snake inside of what looks to be like a Crookes tube. And why wouldn't they use a snake to define? A snake naturally moves in kind of a wavy, curvy fashion. They're trying to describe what a wave is. And why make up a word called wave when you have a snake that does the same thing? Just use a snake.
Are you talking about the hieroglyph that looks like a light bulb?
Yeah, exactly. And yet I think that they had the better idea to make it straightforward, to make it simple. And I don't think it had anything to do with worshiping snakes. I don't think it had anything to do with worshiping death. I think that they were using symbols that were the right shape and the right, and then they understood the context. But when we look at it, we go, wow, man, they were really weird and superstitious. And then we reproject our superstitions onto that period and create, and we anthropomorphize everything. And it causes us to lose grip with how scientific these people could have actually been. That's just my personal opinion from what I've observed of, say, natives and their earthwork site, that they are not drawing things haphazardly. If they put an asymmetric glyph They mean it's asymmetric. They don't mean that the turkey's foot is suddenly broken. They're not like slipping with their carving. They're being very careful and recording exactly what they're seeing in the sky. If one foot has 5 toes and the other one has 6 or 4, then that's exactly what they were seeing up in the sky.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And that's been my experience, is to trust their efforts. I think that we look down because we have plastic and computers. We treat them like they're kindergartners with macaroni and picnic plate. And that's not fair, and it's not accurate.
Yeah. Don't forget H-bombs and striped toothpaste.
Yeah.
I hear you, man. Well, the fact is, we can't build them pyramids today. I mean, those things were made, all of the megaliths were made really well.
They were.
Uh,
They were
yeah,
also probably made in a different environment under those conditions of the
exactly.
electric polar configuration, that there would be extra uplift. So if we were to recreate it, we'd have to do it slightly different. We couldn't do it because we limit ourselves. I think that we have the ingenuity to come up with a version of we could put giant earth resonating maser electrical power plants all over the world if we wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had zero carbon green energy. The only thing they had to do was occasionally throw some bowls in a pot and turn it into chemicals.
There's also a legend dating way back from the ancients that live fish were falling from the sky.
Probably something was, there was probably an uplift, and then a thunderbolt struck, and then they all dropped back down.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking too.
I mean, it's undoubtedly that they experienced the force, and of course they got religious. If you experience a force like that, you would get religious too.
Sure.
And I mean, that'd be easy to. No one back then was an atheist. I can tell you that. Not a single person. And how much better for humanity that everybody knew exactly who the God was, where he was, and if he was displeased, we all knew it because the thunderbolt shook the ground. And the word shock in Chinese means earthquake. The ancient word zhen means earthquake. So it's unambiguous that the stamp of the foot or the hammer blow indicated the displeasure of the god and the wrath to follow, and mankind had to live a certain way. But it wasn't necessarily a good way. I'm not saying that it's better. I'm just saying that at least we were unified in one religion worldwide. Later on, of course, they all started picking different solar abodes and spheres to worship. Some picked the moon, and they were living in sin, and others picked Mars, and some picked the sun. And kind of weird because the sun's probably the only legitimate one after the fall of Chrono. Probably the sun, Apollo is probably the only legitimate one because it's the source of all of our current electrical source.
Apollo's the only young god that doesn't have a beard.
Well, I mean, do you think that the sun was with us the whole time, or that our dwarf star approached it?
I think our dwarf star approached it.
Yeah, me too. I think so too. I think that maybe they had been rotating around each other for some time, causing the beginning of the ice ages. Mm-hmm. So for some millions of years, causing the alteration, and then occasionally we would go through some kind of behavior where our star would turn off or turn down, and it would cause an ice age. Mm-hmm. I think that that it was a long, slow approach. And that probably is what gave the impression of the Nibiru. Yeah. Almost certainly that's the story of Nibiru. The irony of that story, by the way, is that Jupiter beckons Nibiru in but it's Neptune as a female god in the Sumerian story, that she wants the sun to be her baby. So there must have been some appearance that the sun, as it was still small and far off, was going sort of around Neptune. So that's an interesting thing, because definitely another thing that the Thunderbolts project they haven't focused on enough is the role of Neptune, Poseidon, Shiva. There is clear references to this blue god for a time, and that just blows my mind because we have to explain where Triton came from and why it goes retrograde. I think Triton might be the banished god Hodor, who kills Balder and is banished to the other world, to roam on his. Of course, that could just be Uranus, but I think it's probably Triton.
Now, Triton is a captured moon that presently is with Neptune now, right?
Right. And so, how to declare, maybe it's quite a beautiful, as far as those moons go, it's quite beautiful to look at. It possibly could have been with us in the Saturnian system, and when things broke up,
I have no idea where that came
from. And Loki tricks him. So Venus tricks Triton, and then Triton gets sent off, and Neptune captures it. And so it's all interesting. I mean, there's certainly.
I'm going to close it and reopen it. It shouldn't be like that. Give me 1 minute.
And you got people who say it's a spaceship's glow, and you got people who say it's some kind of nuclear fire, and some say it's miracle glow light. The problem I have with the miracle glow light stuff is where is it now? I mean, did after the apostles leave, suddenly heaven stops interacting with mankind? Doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that we don't understand how people back then thought of things and how they may have used. It sort of reminds me of that hieroglyphic where it's a snake inside of what looks to be like a Crookes tube. And why wouldn't they use a snake to define? A snake naturally moves in kind of a wavy, curvy fashion. They're trying to describe what a wave is. And why make up a word called wave when you have a snake that does the same thing? Just use a snake.
Are you talking about the hieroglyph that looks like a light bulb?
Yeah, exactly. And yet I think that they had the better idea to make it straightforward, to make it simple. And I don't think it had anything to do with worshiping snakes. I don't think it had anything to do with worshiping death. I think that they were using symbols that were the right shape and the right, and then they understood the context. But when we look at it, we go, wow, man, they were really weird and superstitious. And then we reproject our superstitions onto that period and create, and we anthropomorphize everything. And it causes us to lose grip with how scientific these people could have actually been. That's just my personal opinion from what I've observed of, say, natives and their earthwork site, that they are not drawing things haphazardly. If they put an asymmetric glyph, they mean it's asymmetric. They don't mean that the turkey's foot is suddenly broken. They're not like slipping with their carving. They're being very careful in recording exactly what they're seeing in the sky. If one foot has 5 toes and the other one has 6 or 4, then that's exactly what they were seeing up in the sky.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And that's been my experience, is to trust their efforts. I think that we look down because we have plastic and computers. we treat them like they're kindergartners with macaroni and picnic plate, and that's not fair and it's not accurate.
Yeah. Don't forget H bonds and striped toothpaste.
Yeah.
I hear you, man. Well, the fact is, we can't build them pyramids today. I mean, those things were made, all of the megaliths were made really well.
They were. They were
Yeah,
also probably made in a different environment under those conditions of the
exactly.
electric polar configuration, that there would be extra uplift. So if we were to recreate it, we'd have to do it slightly different. We couldn't do it because we limit ourselves. I think that we have the ingenuity to come up with a version of we could put giant earth resonating maser electrical power plants all over the world if we wanted to. I mean, they had zero carbon green energy. The only thing they had to do was occasionally throw some bowls in a pot and turn it into chemicals.
There's also a legend dating way back from the ancients that live fish were falling from the sky.
Probably something was, there was probably an uplift, and then a thunderbolt struck, and then they all dropped back down.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking too.
I mean, it's undoubtedly that they experienced the force, and of course they got religious. If you experience a force like that, you would get religious too.
Sure.
And I mean that'd be easy to. No one back then was an atheist. I can tell you that. Not a single person. And how much better for humanity that everybody knew exactly who the God was, where he was, and if he was displeased, we all knew it because the thunderbolt shook the ground. And the word shock in Chinese means earthquake. The ancient word zhen means earthquake. So there is it's unambiguous that the stamp of the foot or the hammer blow indicated the displeasure of the god and the wrath to follow, and mankind had to live a certain way, but it wasn't necessarily a good way. I'm not saying that it's better. I'm just saying that at least we were unified in one religion worldwide. Later on, of course, they all started picking different solar abodes and spheres to worship. Some picked the moon, and they were living in sin, and others picked Mars, and some picked the sun. And kind of weird because the sun's probably the only legitimate one after the fall of Chrono. Probably the sun, Apollo is probably the only legitimate one because it's the source of all of our current electrical source.
Apollo's the only young god that doesn't have a beard.
Well, I mean, do you think that the sun was with us the whole time, or that our dwarf star approached it?
I think our dwarf star approached it.
Yeah, me too. I think so too. I think that maybe they had been rotating around each other for some time, causing the beginning of the ice ages. Mm-hmm. So for some millions of years, causing the alteration, and then occasionally we would go through some kind of behavior where our star would turn off or turn down, and it would cause an ice age. Mm-hmm. I think that that it was a long, slow approach. And that probably is what gave the impression of the Nibiru. Yeah. Almost certainly that's the story of Nibiru. The irony of that story, by the way, is that Jupiter beckons Nibiru in, but it's Neptune as a female god in the Sumerian story that she wants the sun to be her baby. So there must have been some appearance that the sun, as it was still small and far off, was going sort of around Neptune. So that's an interesting thing, because definitely another thing that the Thunderbolts project they haven't focused on enough is the role of Neptune, Poseidon, Shiva. There is clear references to to this blue god for a time, and that just blows my mind because we have to explain where Triton came from and why it goes retrograde. I think Triton might be the banished god Hodor, who kills Balder and is banished to the netherworld to roam on his own. Of course, it could just be Uranus, but I think it's probably Triton.
Now, Triton is a captured moon that presently is with Neptune now, right?
Right. And so, how did it get there? Maybe it's quite a beautiful, as far as those moons go, it's quite beautiful to look at. It possibly could have been with us in the Saturnian system, and when things broke up, and there was whatever the party, and Loki tricks him. So Venus tricks Triton, and then Triton gets sent off, and Neptune captures it. So it's all interesting. I mean, certainly. Another thing in our community we've got to do is we've got to go through the Vedas and through the Mahabharata and really break down some of these motions, because it's probably the best record of exactly the motions that happened, and decoding that is going to take a lot of work because there's so much to the Vedas and the Upanishads. And the Mahabharata, of course, if we had a supercomputer that was smart enough, let's say 500 years from now, and it could follow along, I bet the Mahabharata could decode the entire newspaper rock as to what happened and when between different family bodies. But, AI is not there yet. One day its intelligence will be so far beyond us, it'll be able to do it.
Yeah, and one day we'll be able to create a simulation to watch it all unfold, like maybe someone else already did.
Maybe so.
I've heard that, that we're a simulation.
Well, you can't. It's one of those hypotheses you can't prove or disprove until it's done.
Yeah. Scientific theory must be falsifiable in order to be.
At the stage of evolution we're at, it must be. In the future, maybe we'll be able to get around that. Maybe there's some kind of intuition, because I do believe intuition is important. I mean, Newton found out about gravity after he got struck in the head, and that's called Satori in Zen Buddhism. So there must be some function of intuition and knowledge, but right now we've got to step through it the hard way. We got to do it we got to be careful, because there's a lot of really bad theories out there because they just don't use enough data. And this is, again, not to say that Dave Talbot or Cardano or Jonah Cook's theories are bad or whatever. It's just now we are just now getting enough data because of the internet. Because of, in a single night, I could download 170 of these cosmic eggs and measure them all. Next day.
I mean, mainstream just refuses to recognize electricity as a force, I mean, that has anything to do with this. They think it's all because of gravity and inertia.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
If the mainstream knew anything, they wouldn't be looking for dark matter. So
no doubt.
As Dr. Anthony Peratt told Ben, we have it all in the lab. They just don't have enough power because they didn't have what we had. He had unlimited funds from the federal government. University labs, they don't have that, so they gotta kind of invent their way to the answer, and just guessing. They're just taking stabs in the dark and hoping they could become rock stars, because they created, those people that created string theory became rock stars. They were wrong, but they became huge. They became, they snookered everyone for about 10 years. Everybody was bamboozled, and we were totally in awe of them. We assumed that when the Large Hadron Collider turned on, we would find not just the Higgs boson, but we would find strings, we would find everything. And it was ultimately a big dud, but that's a good thing in the world of science. Good thing, because you eliminate a number of bad theories.
Yeah, right, exactly. All right, man. Well, we've been. Do you have anything else to add?
No. I've spoke my piece for the evening. Hopefully, this will probably be a bear for you to put it all together. But
No, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna try to leave it as close to the original as possible.
oh, well, good.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna add a few things like when we were talking later, but you'll be happy.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Hey, no problem. I'm gonna send you that link. I want you to watch that video. Plus,
Yeah,
I have the first 4 chapters of Celeria Venerea that you should maybe listen to too.
absolutely. When I will get around to it this week and
Yeah,
just put it in there, and
I
I will
will.
start opening them up. I'm wiped out. I'm gonna.
Yeah,
Or you wore me out, Greg.
that's all right, buddy. It was good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Did it? I don't know. Did it? Just out of curiosity, did it alter your perspective, or it's gonna take you a while to absorb it, or what?
Well, yeah, I want to absorb it, and I mean, right now, I don't even know what my perspective is. I know that I believe Saturn theory happened in one way or another, but I'm not confining myself to any kind of paradigm right now. Just taking in the information and sorting it out as I go. You know,
I
I
understand.
yeah, I definitely do not think that accretion is the answer.
Oh, that,
So
that's coming. I do have a paper on that, by the way, that Haumea destroys accretion.
yeah, I'm my whole outlook is always getting new information and disseminating it as I go.
Well, I feel like I'm getting close to the Egyptian priests who told Solon the Greeks were babies.
There you go. Yeah.
And that level with that Egyptian priests, I feel like I will have, because I'm at the stage where I can't even look at what the Tao. I used to get along with all the Taoists. I still like the philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Fact is, they just don't understand where it came from, and when it gets down to it, they have a lot of hocus pocus to their belief systems, and that's fine. Everybody can have a religion; they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm busy showing that Tao is much older than they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're busy still propagating the idea that Lao Tzu, or Lao for the historical person, actually created Taoism, and it's just flat wrong. Just flat wrong.
I just always try to stay in the uppermost, and go from there. I'm not. I don't have any one particular God that I'm, praying to. I don't really know what the situation. I think about it a lot, though. What happens after death? That's the $1 million question, right? I think the older you get, the more you think about it.
I would say this to anybody who is a what do you call a doubter or disbeliever or whatever, and they say, "Where's your proof of God?" I'd say, "Well, which one you want to talk about? Which era, which form, which shape? I mean, there's tons of evidence for God. Give me a break,
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyways, that's just me.
Hey, all right, Ramon. Well,
Cool.
I need a little bit of time, and I'll. All right, buddy.
Thank you.
It was fun. I'll get with this, and it'll be done soon.
Okay. Talk soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. And that will conclude our conversation. I gotta admire Ramon's moxie. He's not afraid to say how he feels. And I wouldn't mind having a discussion about it. After this is finished, I'm gonna check the general chat out, and we're gonna try to get it together with a little talking. All right. I apologize. I'm in the midst of allergy season, and it wasn't until I listened to it before I realized how irritating my constant sniffles were. I apologize for that. I thought I was muting it, but it didn't mute. All right. I'll talk to you very soon. Take care.
Okay, I had to go right straight to the player to get that last 10 minutes in. I'm going to check out chat here and see if there's anybody that is on Discord. So if you're listening, get on and I'll be right back.
The MF project has arrived.
Well, we've been here before, slamming those doors. It's 4:15 in the morning. All we do now is fight. No, we won't sleep tonight. Yeah, we're dangerous like fire. We should carry a warning. If I tear my heart out, I still feel pain. Whatever I do, still feels the same. Act like it's nothing, but tell me now, what were we thinking of? Everything that we had, well, it's gone to waste. If I stand up the sunshine, all I see is rain. So I tear my heart out. You were 19 years old when you ran out of home, and your daddy said no. I fell for you. No, we won't sleep tonight. It's 4:15. All we do now is fight in the morning. But tell me now, what were we thinking of? Everything that we had, well, it's gone to waste. If I stand in the sunshine, all I see is rain. So I tear my heart out.
All right, well, there's nobody in chat, so I'm going to show a Greg J show from the past. That's all I can really do at this point. Until somebody shows up. When they do, then I'll have someone to talk to. I do have my eye on an article, too, on the Theosophists that I was thinking about reading, because I want to find out what they were about. Just curious, you know. I hear a lot of stories. Okay, so I might read that too, but we'll watch this for now until I can figure something out. It's not a bad show. It's one of my favorites. And I don't really watch my own shows, but if I did, I'd watch this one. All right. I'll be back.
Implement policies meant to incentivize a reduced population.
It's time to remove your footprint. Agenda 21 is coming soon.
Он бежит. Лёша, кто закрыл? Он идет.
I have always maintained that the spirit world has a healthy sense of humor. Black triangles are a class of unidentified flying objects, with certain common features which have reportedly been observed since the 1940s to present. Reports of black triangles generally originate from the United States and Britain. Reports generally describe this class of UFOs as enormous, silent, black triangular crafts, hovering or slowly cruising at low altitudes over cities and highways, usually at night, making no attempt to evade detection. They just sit there. It's like they're just like, here I am. I got a TR-3B and you don't.
That's right, we bad. That's right.
See me, I'm America's most classified airframe. I guess that's kind of what they call soft disclosure. These crafts are often described as having running lights, either bright, white lights or pulsing colored lights that appear at each corner of the triangle. Now, this reprint of the TR-3B specifications claim is based on information generally credited to Edgar Fouché, who claimed involvement with this project in the 1990s. We make no claims about whether this is factually accurate or not. Hundreds of thousands of people know about it and have seen it. It's probably going to be declassified soon, I would imagine. Unless it already is. I would probably think it is. But this story becomes more interesting as time progresses. What was originally considered to be a wacky UFO claim seems to be the benefactor of a great deal of coincidence as AG research moves forward. Simply put, the TR-3B's claim to use an MHD torus field with a virtual plasma of high-pressure mercury is strikingly similar to the unrelated claims of Igor Vygotsky about the construction of the Nazi Bell device, as well as anecdotal evidence relating to other instances of AG effects, anti-gravity effects, and mercury in the presence of RF fields, radio frequency fields, I'm thinking. Additionally, a plasma toroid is the only means of replicating some aspects of Eugene Plekhanov's superconductor experiments on a larger scale than achievable through traditional Type II ceramic superconductors. Plasmas and SCs both absorb magnetic field lines. It should be noted that none of the individuals in any of these claims were aware of each other's existence when they published their work, making the similarities quite striking. The tactical reconnaissance, TR-3B's code name, Astra, the ancient name that was given to the Vermanas, if I'm not mistaken. First operational flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program with SDI and black budget monies. At least 3 of the billion-dollar-plus TR-3Bs were flying by 1994. The Aurora is the most classified aerospace development program in existence. The TR-3B is the most exotic vehicle created by the Aurora program. It is funded and operationally tasked by the National Reconnaissance Office, the NSA, and the CIA. The TR-3B Flying Triangle is not fiction, with technology available in the mid-80s. Not every UFO spotted is one of theirs. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. This polymer skin, when used in conjunction with the TR-3B's electric countermeasures and ECCM, can make the vehicle look like a small aircraft or a flying cylinder, or even trick radar receivers into falsely detecting a variety of aircraft, no aircraft, or several aircraft at various locations. A circular plasma-filled accelerator ring called the magnetic field disruptor surrounds the rotatable crew compartment and is far ahead of any imaginable technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed the reverse-engineered MFD technology. Reverse-engineered from what, pray tell? The government will go to any lengths to protect this technology. The plasma, mercury-based, it's all over the internet. It's almost like the stealth fighter when it first got known. Everybody thought it was crazy, and then they started talking about it, and the next thing you know, they just came out with it. It's just about the same thing. The plasma, mercury-based, is pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin and accelerated to 50,000 RPM to create a superconductive plasma with the resulting gravity disruption. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field, which disrupts or neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. Do not misunderstand, this is not anti-gravity. Anti-gravity provides a repulsive force that can be used for propulsion. The MFD creates a disruption of the Earth's gravitational field upon the mass with the circular accelerator. The mass of the circular accelerator and all mass within the accelerator, such as the crew capsule, avionics, MFD system, fuels, crew, environmental system, and nuclear reactor, are reduced by 89%. This causes the effect of making the vehicle extremely light and able to outperform and outmaneuver any aircraft yet constructed, except, of course, those UFOs we did not build. This was in the Navy video I did. This was our hot rod that I was relating to. The TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with an indefinite loiter time, and it also has weapons on board, as you'll see. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. At Groom Lake, there have been whispered rumors of a new element that acts as a catalyst to the plasma. With the vehicle mass reduced by 89%, the craft can travel at Mach 9, vertically or horizontally. My sources say performance is limited only to the stresses that the human pilots can endure, which is a lot, really, considering along with the 89% reaction in mass, the G-forces are also reduced by 89%. The TR-3B's propulsion is provided by 3 multi-mode thrusters mounted at each bottom corner of the triangular platform. The TR-3B is a sub-Mach 9 vehicle until it reaches altitudes above 120,000 feet. Then God knows how fast it can go. The multi-mode rocket engines, mounted under each corner of the craft, use hydrogen or methane as oxygen and oxygen as propellant. In a liquid oxygen hydrogen rocket system, 85% of the propellant mass is oxygen. The nuclear thermal rocket engine uses hydrogen propellant augmented with oxygen for additional thrust. The reactor heats the liquid hydrogen and injects liquid oxygen in the supersonic nozzle so that the hydrogen burns concurrently in the liquid oxygen afterburner.
I'm driving right here, eastbound 11th Avenue, and right in this field is where I observed it.
CENTCOM 5404.
It was like just within the snap of the finger. It was way down, you know, way down the other side of town, and it was amazing.
And there was no sound?
Not a sound at all. None whatsoever.
So I hopped out of my patrol car, went to the rear.
What does it look like to you?
This object was above me about 500 feet. It was huge.
It's like it tried to camouflage itself against the night sky, like it was trying to project the star field above it on the underside.
Could you imagine being the guy that gets to climb behind the cockpit and take it for a spin? Man, I could imagine a whole fleet of them off planet, just buzzing around. Just flying carpet. Wow. It's a big responsibility, though, flying $1 billion plus around. But I bet you it's a blast when you know what you're doing. I just saw Russia's top fighter, which is actually better than our top fighter. I can't remember the name, SU something. But anyways, this thing, it's got vector thrusters, and it can just stand straight up in midair and just mess with his vectors. That wouldn't do anything to this, and this can do that, and 10 times more. I'm into military aircraft. I have been all my life. I grew up right next to an Air Force base, so I think it's cool. I remember a few years ago watching Richard Dolan, and he said something that I still remember. He said, if you think the U.S. is going to give up being the dog who pees on every other dog's tree, you have to own space. So it's a foregone conclusion that the U.S. isn't never going to stop going into space. They just stopped doing it publicly. And I so wish that we weren't like that. When I was a kid, I guess I was really bamboozled because I used to think America would never attack another country first and would always help little countries. Wow, was I ever wrong? Really, it kind of broke my heart when I realized I was.
Oh, shit!
The multi-mode propulsion system can operate in the atmosphere with thrust provided by the nuclear reactor, in the upper atmosphere with hydrogen propulsion, and in orbit with the combined hydrogen-oxygen propulsion. What you have to remember is that the 3 rocket engines only have to propel 11% of the mass of the top-secret TR-3B. The engines are reportedly built by Rockwell. Many sightings of triangular UFOs are not alien vehicles, but top-secret TR-3B. The NSA, NRO, CIA, and USAF have been playing a shell game with aircraft nomenclature, creating the TR-3B modified to the TR-3A, the TR-3B, and their Tier 2, 3, and 4, with suffixes like plus or minus added on to confuse further the fact that each of these designators is a different aircraft and not the same aerospace vehicle. A TR-3B is as different from the TR-3A as a banana is from a grape. Some of these vehicles are manned and others are not. Very interesting indeed.
Oddities. The incredible Pentagon footage shows UFOs are real as objects shoot through the sky. U.S. Navy this week announced it has introduced a formal procedure for military personnel to report sightings of unidentified flying objects. And in this breathless shock and amazement of the fighter pilots, that makes the incredible footage that they are filming apparently show UFOs whizzing through the air. I'm sure you're probably familiar with this. The experienced airmen watched in disbelief as infrared cockpit cameras tracked fast-flying objects, doing things no human aircraft could. The 40-foot long oval-shaped UFOs had no wings, rotors, or any discernible means of propulsion. Yet they were seen to hover in the sky, halt suddenly, change direction as if it bounced off a wall, and instantly accelerated to hypersonic speeds. The objects were filmed at an incredible 5,000 miles per hour. It's got the picture there, and of course the video that everybody in the world has probably seen. And apparently there was a whole fleet of them. And here's what's good. The amazing images were revealing the Pentagon declassified the sightings of U.S. Navy pilots. Now there's got to be a reason. The military never does anything without a reason. There's got to be a reason why they're coming out with this. And it's legitimate. During that time, the highly experienced crews that were flying from American aircraft carriers spotted UFOs almost every day in the skies over the U.S. East Coast. Radar shows the crafts are as high as 80,000 feet, directions so quickly. One pilot compared it to a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. The resulting G-force would kill a human with such a maneuver. Lieutenant Ryan Graves said he saw strange objects with no visible engine or exhaust plumes flying at 30,000 feet while on a training mission. Graves is a 10-year Super Hornet pilot, said these things would be out there all day. With speeds we observe, 12 hours in the air is 11 hours longer than we'd expect. Another pilot, Danny Acoin, said he encountered the objects twice. First time he picked one up on his radar. He set his plane to head toward it while flying 1,000 feet below. It was clearly visible on his radar, missile system, and infrared camera. He claimed he couldn't see it through his helmet camera, leading to suggestions that UFOs have developed invisibility cloaking. I've heard this for some time. 10 years before the 2014 sightings, another Navy pilot described an almost identical craft during a training mission. Commander David Fravor described how he and his colleagues saw a large object just below the surface of the water. Now get this, another 50 feet above, hovering erratically. They described it as 40 feet long, white, wingless, and shaped like an oblong pill. As Commander Fravor flew towards it, the second object rose to meet him at a fast speed and acceleration. He said the hair in the back of my neck was standing up. I was thinking, I'm going to be watching a disaster here. You're wondering, how can I possibly fight this? Military insiders say it is an open secret that UFOs exist. Instead, the object suddenly peeled away at a speed that Commander Fravor admits left him feeling pretty weirded out. And his radar showed the object had appeared under a minute later, 60 miles away. That's a mile a minute. Oh, that's not so big, though. We'll do that in a car. A mile a second, maybe. That was probably what it is. Yeah. No, this is a minute. Under a minute later. And meanwhile, Kevin Day, senior radar operator on the USS Princeton at the time, says his screen showed well over 100 UFOs over the course of that week. Man, I mean, Earth must be a magnet. He said watching them on the display was like watching snow fall from the sky. Amid amazement at the extraordinary footage and first-hand witness accounts, the U.S. Navy announced it has introduced a formal yet secret procedure for military personnel to report sightings of UFOs. Until now, crews had been told to ignore unexplained sightings in the air rather than report them. They probably want to send one of our little hot rods after them, because they want to get their hands on that saucer. For that reason, the Navy is updating and formalizing the process by which reports of any such suspected incursions can be made to the cognizant authorities. Pilots observing these craft after absolutely mystified and comes through clearly in their public statements. The issue is, why are they here? Where are they coming from? And what is the technology behind these devices that we are observing? That Fravor guy was on Joe Rogan, I heard. They're being awful liberal with that whole thing. It makes me think that that's just disinformation. They want us to be confused so we don't notice their TR3Bs. That's what I think. But hey, you never know. It could be true.
They just want to make that line fuzzy.
So, I don't know, you take it with a grain of salt, I suppose. I do, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, all of a sudden, it's not crazy anymore to talk about UFOs. Did you notice that? So, that is... I admit I have a weakness for weird thinking.
The details of my life are quite
For
inconsequential.
video games have come so far that I would think that some really advanced race of extraterrestrials could create their own gaming world where the creatures in the game are actually conscious. See where I'm going with this? We're a video game for extraterrestrials. You know how our video games are getting better and better? I have mused a few times about it. So good that it will be a somewhat real experience, like an escape. It could even lead to having characters that are conscious. Let's forget the morality issue, but say we could. They would to themselves know they exist, but not quite know where they came from, as we created them within the game. And if they had free will to an extent, they may even hypothesize about it. In essence, they would be just like us. So I have to ask, are we an advanced ET civilizationist high-tech video game? We don't know any of that stuff either. That's the thought of the day. And that will conclude the Oddities section for the evening.
The sort of general malaise that only the genius possess and the insane lament.
Well, that was fun. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to play Standard Model versus Electric Universe. Who gives the best explanation? Now, this may not be new to some of you, but it is to me. Astronomers spot a new type of storm on Saturn. Bigger than squalls, they are smaller than the planet's massive great white spots. Saturn saw some weird weather last year. Telescope images revealed a newfound type of storm. It raged near the planet's north pole in 2018. Researchers have just reported. This was November 18, 2019, so it can't be that old. Until now, astronomers had seen only two types of storm on this gas giant. Some were relatively small, about 2,000 kilometers, about 1,250 miles across. They appeared as bright clouds for a few days. More impressive have been Saturn's great white spots. These rare tempests are 10 times as large and can rage for months. The newest phenomena are a series of 4 mid-sized storms. Each was somewhat bigger than the days-long storms, lasting about 1.5 weeks to 7 months. Oh, there's a storm. Saturn storms are thought to originate in water clouds hundreds of kilometers below the planet's upper cloud layer. Studying these events can offer a window into deep atmospheric goings-on, ones that aren't directly observable, says Agustin Sanchez La Vega. He studies planetary atmospheres at the University of Basque Country in Bilbao, Spain. Sanchez La Vega was part of a team that analyzed hundreds of telescope images. Some were taken by amateur astronomers, others came from the Calar Alto Observatory in Spain and NASA's Hubble telescope. From late March to late October of last year, 4 unusual bright spots appeared in the atmosphere near Saturn's North Pole. That was between the latitudes of 67 degrees north, 74 degrees north. Triggering each mid-sized storm required about 10 times as much energy as would be needed to get a small storm going. Computer models showed, however, mid-sized storms took only about 1/100th the energy needed to brew up a great white spot. Sanchez La Vega and his group described the new storms online October 21st, Nature Astronomy. I'm kind of curious to hear what they think causes them, as I think I know. Still, largely a mystery. The storm outbreak almost leaves more questions than it can give answers, says George Fisher. He's a planetary scientist at the Space Research Institute of the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Graz. He was not involved in the new analysis. In 2018, telescope images, for instance, don't show whether the newfound storms crackled with lightning. Small storms typically boast a few flashes per minute. The more energetic great white spots flash several times a second. Ooh, yeah, that's what I thought. If similar mid-sized storms appear in the future, Fisher says radio telescopes that monitor Saturn's tempests for lightning could look for whether the middling storms are more similar to their small or their giant counterparts. That might help scientists figure out how they form from electricity. The timing of the 2018 storms hints that they might have been a failed great white spot. These planetary scale storms have been observed only 6 times since 1876. Those few data points seem to indicate that great white spots form at around the same latitudes once every 60 years or so. The last time Saturn sported a far north great white spot near latitudes where 2018 storm quartet emerged was 1960. There you see a picture of the great white spots going up there in the northern hemisphere by the pole, April 1st all the way to August 16th. I know that I heard of dragon storms. The storm actually looks like a dragon. And another in space spotted a series of storms near Saturn's North Pole. White spots indicated by black arrows. Not all of the storms were visible at once. The shortest lasted about 10 days. The longest raged for 214 days. These weather disturbances were larger than storms previously seen on the gas giant, but nowhere near as big as Saturn's rare great white spots. It's possible that a 2010 great white spot that formed further south took so much energy from Saturn's atmosphere that there was only enough left to fuel a few middling storms last year, Sanchez La Vega says. Well, it's a former star. It's got plenty of energy. But planetary scientist Robert West is skeptical that the 2010 great white spot could have interfered with storm activity so far north. He says that because gases swirling in Saturn's atmosphere at different latitudes tend to stay in their own lane, he instead suspects that last year's storm sequence was not a failed great white spot, but a whole different thing. West, who was not part of the new study, works at Caltech and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Both are in Pasadena, California. For now, he says the origins of those intermediate storms and how they relate to other weather phenomena on Saturn remain a mystery. So, like we usually do, let's head over to the thunderbolts.info website, and we're going to take a look and see what they have to say about it, if anything. Boy, don't you know it? Saturn's reign, October 23rd, 2019. A great white spot storm that raged in 2010 and 11. It kind of looks like either a woman, like if you were to turn her 90 degrees, she'd be standing there with her arms sticking out like kind of skeleton looking. Could be a Grim Reaper. Or it's one of them dragon storms. That's what I'm talking about. Saturn is a violent electrical environment. Recently, planetary scientists announced a new type of storm swirling near Saturn's North Pole. Stephen Smith is on top of it. Robert West from Caltech and JPL says the origins of the storms and how they relate to other weather phenomena on Saturn are still mysterious. The planet Saturn could be thought of as the captain of its own solar system. With a family of 82 moons, Saturn emits more energy than it receives, 2.3 times more. So it is powered by another source. It is also probable that the interior of the planet has its own heat. There is good evidence that Saturn once existed as an independent body from the Sun. As such, it would have received more energy in the recent past, its power source usurped by the Sun. Saturn exhibited many changes over the almost 40 years since the Voyager spacecraft flew by the giant gas planet and several of its largest moons. Saturn's magnetosphere grew by more than 1 million kilometers, contracted, and then started expanding again. Saturn's B-ring spokes disappeared and then reappeared. The so-called dragon storm broke up, moved toward the poles, and then erupted again. Now, you don't hear them talk like, say this. Everything's a big enigma there. I mean, if they don't know what causes storms on Saturn, how would they know that there was a big bang? See, it's just so much more information. Every so often, Saturn breaks out with a great white spot, 3 times larger than Earth. Traditional models of Saturn cannot explain such a periodic outburst, but an intense lightning discharge deep in the atmosphere could cause vertical jets similar to the sprites in Earth's upper atmosphere. Its electrical connection to the solar system can explain the effects that Cassini discovered on and around Saturn. The most likely explanation for the storms on Saturn is that they are equivalent to sunspots. As the sun changes its behavior over the course of a 22-year cycle, the electrical output that connects it with its family of planets varies. If Saturn's great white spots, dragon storm, and ring spokes are driven by the same galactic Birkeland currents that drive the sun, they should get stronger and closer to the equator as the sunspot cycle oscillates. It appears that is what happened over the past 3 decades. Evidence suggests that Saturn was once of greater stature, but was dethroned from its position of prominence in the sky. It was not the tiny pinprick of light that can be seen on dark nights. Rather, it was worshipped as the central luminary, the all-powerful sun. If that was the case, then its current position in the solar system is far removed from what it was. I remember Grazia saying that there was a tempest on its insides right now, and has been for a while, probably since it's been dethroned. Without going into details that are elaborated elsewhere, that disturbance and rearrangement of planets means that Saturn is the way it is not because of how it was conventionally formed, but because it is closer to being a star than it is to being a planet. Indeed, as our ancestors tell us, it was a star. Stephen Smith. Which one to you sounds the best? I haven't had mainstream one yet, in my opinion. It's always an enigma and a head-scratcher. Come here, you get the answer. That's what I like. One of my favorite nebulas of all time, the famous Eye of God Nebula, I believe it is called the Helix Nebula, may actually be weeping tears of water. It's one of the most iconic celestial images in astronomy. The eye, like Helix Nebula. Ironically, the incredibly harsh conditions within this dying sun-like star, are producing a molecule integral for the formation of water, a process that could be repeated across the cosmos. Planetary nebulas consist of an expanding glowing shell of ionized gas ejecting from old red giant stars late in their lives. The core becomes a hot white dwarf, pouring out ultraviolet radiation into its surroundings. This radiation can be so intense that it can actually destroy molecules that have been thrown out by the star. Molecules bound up in the rings of material seen at the outer edge of planetary nebulas. Water-building molecule in Helix Nebula. Astronomers surmised that this harsh radiation restricted the formation of new molecules in those regions. But it now appears that this is not only incorrect, it may contribute to a process that generates a molecule responsible for the formation of water, a molecule known as OH+, a positively charged combination of a single oxygen and hydrogen atom. Oh, I said charged. A new study by Isabel Ailman of the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, shows that planetary nebulas, when exceeding temperatures of 100,000 degrees Celsius, produce OH+. We think that a critical clue is in the presence of the dense clumps of gas and dust, which are illuminated by UV and X-ray radiation emitted by the hot central star. Noted Ailman in an ESA statement, this high-energy radiation interacts with the clumps to trigger chemical reactions that leads to the formation of the molecules. There's a beautiful picture of it. I mean, I have seen so many awesome pictures of it, and I don't use that word lightly. I mean, when I say awesome, I mean truly awesome. That is just so compelling. A separate study by Mireia Exeluz of the Institut de Ciencia de los Materiales de Madrid, Spain, focused on the Helix Nebula, one of the nearest planetary nebulas to our solar system, a distance of 700 light-years. This nebula, which burns at 120,000 degrees Celsius, contains a rich variety of molecules. Looking at Herschel data, Excelencia's team found OH+ in locations where carbon monoxide molecules, previously ejected by the star, are most likely to be annihilated by the strong UV radiation. Once oxygen atoms are free from the carbon monoxide, they're able to make the oxygen-hydrogen molecules, a process that bolsters the hypothesis that UV radiation promotes their creation. These studies are the first to show how planetary nebulas may seed the cosmos with OH+. I think that the reason why there are so many different pictures of it is because it's photographed in different light frequencies. An image of the Helix Nebula in the constellation Aquarius exposes more details of its electrical structure. The infrared image shows radio Birkeland currents, called strands, in the press release, crossing the concentric rings and converging on the central star. Will strands now replace the former stringy things? They don't know it's called Birkeland currents. They're either obtuse or ignorant, or corrupt. All three. Will strands now replace the former stringy things in the consensus lexicon? One can see especially well in high-resolution image that these currents consist of double filaments that spiral around each other and are evenly spaced around rings. Here you got PhDs, they see Birkeland currents, and they call them stringy things. Wouldn't that mean that it's open for someone on their side to say that they discovered it and name it after themselves? But they don't. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they know they're Birkeland currents. From an electric universe point of view, the image is looking down the axis of the hourglass-shaped galactic current that powers the star. If viewed from the side, the nebula would have a structure like that of the Ant Nebula. The hourglass shape is caused by the Bennett pinch from which the star originated and accumulated its matter. The rings will constitute secondary circuits, subject to their own pinch effects, which explains the concentration of glowing matter in them. The outer ring especially appears to consist of double filaments that twist around each other, exactly what is expected of an electric current in magnetized plasma. The bipolar extension of luminosity in the radial filaments, to upper right and lower left, may indicate a diffusion of ring plasma into the further reaches of the hourglass. The apparent inner ring actually may be located on the far side of the star, symmetric with the outer ring located on the near side. If viewed off-axis, the structure would be similar to that of SN 1987A, a beautiful supernova. Or perhaps the inner ring is located closer to the star in a more constricted part of the hourglass. The main ring is estimated to be about 2 light-years in diameter, and the outer reaches of the nebula can be traced to about 4 light-years. It's quite a ways, further than I thought. This provides an order of magnitude sense of the dimensions of the pinch and current powering the sun. Yeah, really. From which the recently discovered ring of energetic neutral atoms, ENAs, likely originates. The sun's plasma sheath, which the Voyager space probes are now entering, is located well inside the hourglass pinch. So I don't know. This sheath acts as the virtual cathode in the sun's discharge circuit and is coupled with the hourglass current in a manner yet to be determined. Torello-like experiments are needed to explore the mechanism and details of such plasma interactions. The concentrating and centralizing of funding and research since the establishment of NASA and its sister agencies have resulted in a flood of discoveries. However, it has also resulted in the establishment of a monopolistic consensus that has driven out research into alternative hypotheses. That is the sadness of it. The money talks. The poster boy for this disturbing consequence is Halton-Arp, who was denied telescope time in 1983 to pursue evidence of intrinsic redshift. And I did a spotlight on him in my last space show, Space Show 3, in case you're interested. It's very interesting, to say the least. I mean, they are engaging in a religion. And to refine the concepts of alternative hypothesis are unlikely to be done as long as the would-be investigators are exiles. They dig for spare minutes between the cushions of earning a living from other pursuits, and the few temporal coins they find are spent on conceptual outlines. Nothing is left for desperately needed experiments, and this says it all. The once proud queen of the sciences now offers herself for sale to the highest bidder on her street corner. The field of astronomy is no longer a seminar of science, but a battlefield between mercenaries and exiles. Mel Atchison. That was a great article, Mel. I enjoyed that. I remember when that picture was awesome. Now there's a bunch more that make that one pale. Isn't it ironic that it's in the Aquarius constellation? You think that's a coincidence? And once again, I gotta give the better article to Thunderbolts, by far. Anybody who loves cosmogony or cosmology, they're both the same, really. One just deals with origins. Anybody who loves that really needs to learn about Halton-Arp and his ordeal. It will give you a different opinion of how things are done in science. If you don't know about Halton-Arp's experiences with redshift, then you don't know the whole story and therefore cannot make a clear-headed, well-informed decision. Watch the Cosmology Quest. I have it in my Cosmology and Archaeology must-see playlist. It's not your fault. They bury it intentionally. You have to seek it out to ever get it. But I guarantee you, if you're interested in the truth, if you're watching all of these live cosmology shows, I know that you rarely ever learn anything new. You just keep getting rehashed information. They pollute the airways with that stuff. You don't learn a thing. It's just for eye candy. I know because I was once in the same position. Research the electric universe, and I'm not just saying this, I mean this is the truth. And the truth is what counts. You learn something new every time you read an article or watch a program. That's the difference.
The predicted coming Jetsons-like anti-gravity lifestyle of the 50s made a quiet and obtrusive demise. Every major figure in the media was owned by the Dulles brothers. Coincidentally, they were the main lawyers for the Treaty of Versailles. J. Edgar Hoover was spying on Americans since the death of FDR. The phony communist craze was the new Inquisition.
There's a new beast on the rise, and it's been on the rise for a while. Authoritarianism. Thoughts occasioned by two recent announcements from Jerry Dunning Davies, Department of Physics, University of Hull, England, abstract. Fairly recently, two announcements concerning astrophysical observations appeared. The first, from NASA, mentioned the fact that the Voyager 1 spacecraft had detected a 100-fold increase in the intensity of high-energy electrons from elsewhere in the galaxy, diffusing into our solar system from outside. The other revealed that a new all-sky map showed the magnetic fields of the Milky Way with the highest precision, and proceeded to point out that the origin of galactic magnetic fields remains unknown despite intensive research, although it's seemingly assumed that they are constructed via dynamo processes, such as are said to occur in the interiors of the Earth and the Sun. Here it is pointed out that plasma cosmology, electric universe theory, can and does offer viable solutions to these and other supposed problems faced by orthodox cosmology. On December 5th, NASA announced that its Voyager 1 spacecraft had entered a new region between our solar system and interstellar space. All the details may be viewed at jpl.nasa.gov//news. I will put the link in the description. In this announcement, one of the more interesting comments is that Voyager has detected a 100-fold increase in the intensity of high-energy electrons from elsewhere in the galaxy, diffusing into our solar system from outside. This comment is of interest because, apart from the word diffusing, it describes what the electrical model of our universe expects in the virtual cathode region of the solar discharge boundary. Also, on December 6th, it was revealed that the new all-sky map shows the magnetic fields of the Milky Way with the highest precision. It was claimed that the origin of galactic magnetic fields remains unknown despite intensive research. They're not going to get it until it swims up and bites them on the ass. Although it was seemingly assumed that they are constructed via I already read that shit. Some years ago, in an entirely different context, Sir Winston Churchill advised people to learn from the lessons of history, and in the present context, it might seem appropriate to follow this advice in astrophysics. Hence, in this spirit, it might be noted that following the introduction of Newton's mechanical ideas, work still proceeded apace investigating electromagnetic phenomena, and this continued at least into the earlier years of the 20th century, as is evidenced by the contents of J.J. Thomson's book Electricity and Matter. However, this book provides but one example to illustrate the very real emphasis on work involving the effects of the electric and magnetic fields. Work which, incidentally, constantly sought an explanation for the concept of mass in terms of those forces. However, after those early years of the century, the emphasis seems to have shifted to explanations of phenomena purely in terms of gravitational effects, considering that it is accepted that much of the matter in the universe is in the form of plasma. This seems a retrograde step. One may only speculate as to why the emphasis of much scientific research changed in this way. However, thanks to people like Birkeland, Alfvén, more recently Peratt, work in the areas of electromagnetism and plasma physics has continued. The work on plasmas and other electromagnetic phenomena has inspired people to examine astronomical phenomena in these terms, and this has resulted in the so-called electric universe idea as expounded, for example, in the books The Electric Universe and The Electric Sky. Reading through this material makes one immediately aware that, just like accepted theory, the electric universe ideas are supported by computer modeling. But it is also able to draw on parallels between astronomical phenomena and plasma phenomena, observed in the laboratory. Admittingly, drawing such parallels involves scaling up tremendously, but assuming this is possible is little different from assuming that laws seemingly applicable here on Earth are also applicable in the solar system, and indeed throughout the universe. At least visually, some of the phenomena observed in the laboratory are very like what is observed by some of the most powerful telescopes. Electric currents in plasma naturally form filaments due to the so-called pinch effect of the induced magnetic field. Electromagnetic interactions cause these filaments to rotate about one another to form a helical Birkeland current filament pair, and this is very much the structure seen in the double helix nebula near the galactic center. Again, the Hubble image of the planetary nebula NGC 6751 looks remarkably like the view down the barrel of a plasma focus device. Examples such as these prove nothing, but might awaken people to the possibility of alternative explanations for at least some astronomical phenomena. Much of the laboratory work originated with the work of Christian Birkeland more than 100 years ago. It was during his Arctic expeditions at the end of the 19th century that the first magnetic field measurements were made of the Earth's polar regions. His findings also indicated the likelihood that the auroras were produced by charged particles originating in the Sun and guided by the Earth's magnetic field. Personally, I think that they're trying to figure out a way to back into it. Come up with something like the magnetohydrodynamics. That was a cute little amount of double talk to not have to say electromagnetic charge. I think that they're probably somewhere, there's a big think tank, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to do it. They've got to know. They can't be that dense. Is dark energy speeding everything up? January 6, 2020. Dark energy is considered a necessary adjunct to the Big Bang Theory because distant galaxies appear to be accelerating as they recede from Earth-based observatories. Recessional velocity is something that astronomers believe contributes to the redshift of those objects. Redshift is thought to indicate distance and velocity when applied to remote galaxies and galactic clusters. But as written before, what if redshift is a red herring? Many research groups claim to confirm dark energy, but those data can be interpreted in other ways. Expansion of so-called cosmic voids is proposed, so that Big Bang Theory can accommodate the anomalous observations. The universe is presumed to be filled with dark energy, which produces a repulsive force, or the current theory of gravity is incorrect. Modern astrophysics choose the former. I remember reading a comment, it was probably maybe a year ago, maybe two, but it always stuck in my head. It was just a few words. That I don't even remember who the person was, but I thought it was quite prolific. Even it may be wrong, I don't know, it could be right. He said dark energy is electricity and dark matter is magnetism. I thought that was pretty good, because if you think about it, they do work in similar ways. Because magnetism gravitates and electricity radiates. There are those who question the presumption, however. Recently, astrophysics from Yonsei University in South Korea announced that conjectures about Type A supernovae are incorrect. Is this the spectra of those supernovae that contributed to dark energy theory? Adam Rees and Saul Perlmutter were studying Type 1a supernovae because they are considered predictable. Their fluctuating magnitudes are supposed to be reliable indicators of a supernova's true brightness. By calculating redshift, they can find out how far away they are. Rees and Perlmutter were shocked to discover the most distant Type 1a supernovae were accelerating. Not only that, the further away they were, the faster they were speeding up. The effect was called dark energy, because no apparent cosmic influence could be seen. As time went on, new observations by various groups resulted in the conclusion that dark energy makes up 75% of our universe, our dark universe. Electric universe advocates presume that plasma makes up 99.99% of the universe. It is a fascinating convergence. The volume of gravitational mass from dark matter and dark energy is the same as the mass of plasma that is overlooked. From the perspective of the electric universe theory, electric charges drive galaxies and their associated stars. Laboratory experiments confirm that Birkeland current filaments form structures that resemble spiral galaxies. Birkeland currents have a longer range attractive force than gravity by several orders of magnitude, diminishing with the reciprocal of the distance from the current axis, or the square, which could account for the anomalous movement of stars as they revolve around the galactic core, as well as the anomalous acceleration of galaxies in deep space. As physicist and electric universe advocate Walt Thornhill points out, all of the dark things in astronomy are artifacts of a crackpot cosmology. The dark energy model of the universe demands that eventually all of the stars will disappear and there will be eternal darkness. In the words of Brian Schmidt, future for the universe appears very bleak. He confirms my portrayal of Big Bang cosmology as hopeless. Stephen Smith. I happen to agree. And personally, I think it's a no-brainer, really. I mean, their whole foundation is just completely flawed, but yet they subscribe to it like they think it's fact. It's almost kind of insane, really, when you think about it. It doesn't make any sense, even though not one thing lines up on their side. Talk about living in Fantasyland. Fantasyland. The Gnostics believed that we all have a divine spark within. The Gnostic mission was to liberate that spark, to provide us with the knowledge, lead us to the revelation that will help us to understand the true nature of things, not the illusory nature that's been created to hoodwink all of us. Something is at work that will not allow us to be blinded. We always celebrate and revere the intelligence in science, but the brain is not hooked up to the heart. We have a society that feeds our perception, that is completely without things like consciousness, compassion, imagination. I say those things are vitally needed in science. As Velikovsky said, today's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. You have to have an imagination and consciousness. Today with humanity, as you should be able to see, there is a dramatic revival of Gnosticism, away from orthodoxy, whether it's science or spirit, like the Gnostics claimed. Counterfeit spirit hardened the hearts of humanity, is what David Icke says. We are moving away from that in droves. It is a matter of time. Sooner or later, we will stop worshiping the intellect and recognize the heart and soul. Compared to that, the intellect is the village idiot. Just like we don't need church hierarchy, we don't need scientific one either. The more we reevaluate, the less it will impact us. Mainstream science thinks we live in a dark universe, and we are just a collection of biological contamination and movements. Our brains think that we die, it's over. But we should all know that it's so far from the truth. Mainstream science thinks we have no control over our lives, and we have no spirit. I mean, what a bleak outlook. I say the electric universe is hooked into the real deal universe, and sooner or later, it has to fall for them. But as long as we allow them to entertain their delusions of grandeur, or I should say darkness, their delusions of darkness, it will continue the way it has. I have got into quite a few debates with mainstreamers who blindly just parrot what they're told by the hierarchy. They don't take the time to investigate for themselves. And that is where one gets short-circuited. You have to do your own investigation, because after just a little bit, you start to see just how ridiculous mainstream is. If they don't care what we think, why should we care what they think? We shouldn't. They don't personally subscribe to it. They just make us think they do. Hygeia may be the newest known dwarf planet in the solar system. The fourth largest rock in the asteroid belt might now be going by a different classification. New imagery of the asteroid Hygeia reveals it's spherical in shape, supporting the idea that it is in fact a dwarf planet. Before Hygeia, the dwarf planet Ceres was considered to be the smallest of its kind in the solar system. We got a little video here. Yeah, well, why don't we watch it then? Might as well watch it. Let's take a look. This formed one of the most violent impacts in the history of the asteroid belt. Surprisingly, the observations revealed that Hygeia's surface lacks the very large impact crater scientists expected to see. With the help of the sphere instrument on the VLT, astronomers found that Hygeia is spherical, taking the crown from Ceres as the smallest dwarf planet in the solar system. Thank you, ESO. And there is the picture. So how big? New findings was published today, October 28th, in Nature Astronomy. All right. Thank you, ESO. Suppose that is. It looks like a big road structure, but seeing as how it's as big as a country, it's hard to believe. There's Pareidolia right there. You see that? The two eyes and the face. But that's a pretty intricate looking structure. They have more of it over here. You look over here, you'll see it. Got some of it right there, you see. There again. And as far north, well, look at that. It looks like it's been buried a little more, but it's the same kind of a structure. It really makes me wonder what that could be. It's like almost a perfect circle. There's a road there, it looks like. That'd be a wide road, though. And you follow the coast up north, and you find more right there, see? And we're as far north as Maine now. It's there again. What do you think that is? You have any idea? I'm told nature doesn't make straight lines. It looks like something was in there gouging the ground. It's pretty intricate. Now remember what Ramon said about the wheel or the circle being sacred to the Native Americans, and we have the sacred symbol, the sacred Zuni symbol here. That reminds me a lot of the focus device, the plasma, the Bennett pinch. That's what I see there. I wonder, you know, and what is Lucy doing on the top of a nebula? That is Lucy from the Peanuts game, is it not? In closing, I'd like to give the warmest thank you I can to my supporters on PayPal and Patreon and good friends. And I guess that's all until next time. We have a lot of good stuff coming. I got the King Arthur in America with Ramon coming very soon. I'm also going to do some reading from Celeria Venerea. I did a little reading of that, and also a special little thing I'm going to be doing on the Nag Hammadi codices and the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know that those two things were found within 2 years of each other, and they really weren't studied until the year 1947, which was a very kind of critical year. I'm going to be bringing all that up, so hopefully you can join with me when all things are considered. Like they say, there are no islands in space.
Communism is the scavenger of decaying civilizations. It makes its way into a country and into a culture only when that culture begins to rot from the inside. Measure of the incipient death in any civilization is the progress that communism makes. And just as soon as this culture begins to die, then this winged scavenger, with the mechanical wings of hammer and sickles, descend upon these decaying countries in order to devour them.
I'm gonna end this stream so that I can keep them no longer than 2 hours. is folks don't like 4-hour videos. I'm gonna stop this stream for 5 or 10 minutes and then start it back up. It's better to keep them broke up like that, okay? So I hope you stick around. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you for watching. I hope you come back. I just want to say thank you for your viewership. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you on down the road.
There is but one mind in all these men, and it is bent against Caesar. If thou beest not immortal, look about you. Security gives way to conspiracy.
The communists in the Kremlin are engaged in a monstrous conspiracy.
Searching for secret conspiracies is tortuous, complex, frustrating.
Discredit what would happen if we had an informed electorate.
The problem of corruption. You read about the mess in Washington.
There are a lot of people who lie and get away with it. And
open your minds and don't believe them. Don't believe them. Don't
that
believe.
paints me as a fringe conspiracy nut.
We know that once a person is perverted, it is practically impossible for that person to adjust to normal attitudes.
The whole world is sick to the extent people lie. Ultimately, they are caught lying and they lose their credibility.
I have to tell you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe it. But when you see some of the things that have gone on in this country...
I say, why can't we have prosperity built on peace rather than prosperity built on wealth?
I think some of his advisors were really hard-nosed, semi-Nazis.
It's a conspiracy. I'm an innocent bystander, a victim.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
You're suppressing the conspiracy. You're part of the mainstream conspiracy. And, you know, if you work for NBC, it's GE.
What the conspiracy is about.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is.